or so it seemed. Across the globe, children were waking up to their morning routines, some heading to school, others playing with their toys. But then, the announcement flashed across screens everywhere. Elon Musk, the visionary behind SpaceX, Tesla, and 1,000 other ambitious ventures, was issuing a challenge like no one had ever seen before. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? What if the future of humanity lay in the hands of children? Musk's voice echoed through television sets and social media feeds, grabbing the attention of millions. For decades, we've been searching for the next big idea, the next great mind that can push humanity forward. But what if that mind already exists, in someone who's only 6, 7, or 8 years old? It was a bold statement, one that stunned the world into silence. How could children possibly change the course of history? But Musk wasn't just talking. He was challenging them. He was calling them to prove themselves. The rules were simple. Young inventors from around the world, between the ages of 6 and 8, would compete to come up with the most groundbreaking ideas that could solve some of the world's most pressing problems: climate change, space colonization, artificial intelligence ethics, and medical breakthroughs. The stakes? $1 billion investment into their ideas, and the opportunity to work alongside Musk himself to make their dreams a reality. "The future starts now," was the tagline, and the countdown to this once-in-a-lifetime competition had officially begun. Within hours of the announcement, the world was buzzing. Parents everywhere had their eyes glued to screens, watching as Musk's challenge sparked a whirlwind of excitement. Could children really have the answers we've been searching for? The social media feeds flooded with hashtags like #NextGenInnovators, #MuskChallenge, and #FutureMinds. Millions of people around the world were sharing their thoughts, dreams, and hopes. Could a 7-year-old create a sustainable energy solution? Could an 8-year-old cure cancer? And perhaps the most burning question of all, who would answer the call? For our young heroes, the moment was nothing short of surreal. This wasn't just a competition. It was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to change the future of the world, and each of them was determined to take it. 6-year-old Mia Alvarez was sitting on the floor of her bedroom, surrounded by piles of tiny gears, wires, and metal parts. She didn't even notice her mother standing in the doorway until she spoke. "Mia, did you hear what Elon Musk said?" her mom asked, her voice full of wonder. Mia looked up, her brown eyes wide with curiosity. She had already heard about the competition, of course. After all, she had been building robots since she could walk. She was fascinated by machines, more than she was by dolls or games. Robots, to her, were like friends, little helpers who could solve problems and make the world better. Her mother handed her the phone. "Take a look at this," she said. The video from Musk's announcement started playing, and Mia's heart skipped a beat as she listened. Children under the age of 8, Musk was saying, have been the true innovators throughout history. I believe it's time to challenge them to change the world. Mia smiled. Could I really do this? She thought. She immediately turned to her workbench and picked up her half-built robot. It wasn't finished yet, but she had a feeling. This was just the beginning. She knew her creations had the potential to solve problems like rescuing people from disasters or helping the elderly. This challenge, it felt like it was meant for her. 7-year-old Luke Carter was in his garage, staring at a stack of old scrap metal. His dad was sitting nearby, working on a car, when the announcement came through on the radio. Luke's ears perked up as he heard Musk's voice, loud and clear. The future belongs to the bold. And sometimes, the boldest minds come from the youngest generation. "Dad," Luke said, his eyes lighting up, "I could do this." Luke's dad looked at him, a bit skeptical. "Son, it's a big challenge and you're young. Are you sure?" "I've been making wind turbines since I was 5. Luke interrupted excitedly. He pulled up his notebook, where he had drawn countless designs for more efficient wind energy systems. He was going to change the world with sustainable power. He knew it. But how? The challenge Musk had laid down was no small feat. This wasn't just about building a small model. This was about coming up with a solution that could power entire cities, countries, even planets. Could his idea work on a global scale? He didn't know yet, but he was determined to find out. 8-year-old Emily Nguyen was sitting on her bed, her thoughts racing. She had been thinking about science for as long as she could remember. How does the human body fight off diseases? What happens when things go wrong? These questions drove her, especially after losing her grandmother to cancer. Her dream was to create medical breakthroughs, cures for diseases, treatments for conditions no one had figured out how to fix yet. Emily's mind was already several steps ahead. She knew how to apply CRISPR technology, and she had been experimenting with genetic engineering for years. The competition? It was a challenge she had been waiting for. Emily's fingers danced over her phone as she began to research the other contestants. Would they be as serious as she was about solving real-world problems? Could she really show the world that she was ready? Her mother, who had been watching the announcement with her, smiled softly. "You've got this, Emily. You've always had this." And Emily knew that, somehow, this challenge was more than just an opportunity for fame or money. It was a chance to bring hope to people who needed it most. As Mia, Luke, and Emily worked on their ideas, the world watched. Social media exploded with excitement as parents, teachers, and innovators everywhere rallied behind their young contestants. Hashtags like #YoungInnovators, #FutureLeaders, and #GenZRevolution flooded the internet. It was clear that these young children weren't just participating in a game. They were changing the conversation about what the future of innovation could look like. Children were stepping up to face problems that had long seemed insurmountable, armed with nothing but their creativity and drive. As the countdown to Elon Musk's groundbreaking competition drew closer, the eyes of the world were on the young prodigies who had been selected to participate. These children weren't just bright, they were brilliant in ways that defied their age. But what made them unique wasn't just their intelligence. It was their relentless curiosity, their unshakable belief that they could change the world. And behind each of them lay a story that shaped who they were. 6-year-old Mia Alvarez had always been different. While most children played with dolls and stuffed animals, Mia was more interested in gears, circuits, and motors. Her parents had noticed this unusual fascination when she was barely old enough to speak. At the age of 2, Mia could name more tools than most adults. By the time she was 4, she had already built her first rudimentary robot using spare parts her father had lying around the house. Mia's fascination with technology stemmed from a video she had seen at the age of 3, a clip of a robot saving people from a building collapse. What if I could build a robot that could help people too? She had thought at the time. From that moment on, Mia's dream was clear: to create robots that could solve real-world problems, whether it was saving lives in disasters or helping the elderly with everyday tasks. Her room, though small, was her workshop. Shelves were lined with boxes of old electronics, tools, and half-finished projects. The walls were covered with blueprints, sketches of robots, systems, and ideas that might one day change the world. Even though Mia was just 6, she was already known for her ability to put things together in ways others couldn't. She didn't just build robots, she gave them a purpose. Mia's mom, Sophia, was her greatest supporter. Sophia wasn't a scientist herself, but she saw the spark in Mia's eyes from an early age. She'd always encourage her daughter's passion, even if it meant staying up late into the night working on Mia's projects. "You're going to make a big difference, Mia," Sophia would say, her voice filled with pride. For Mia, the invitation to Elon Musk's competition wasn't just a chance to showcase her skills. It was a chance to prove that even someone as young as her could make a difference. "Maybe my robots will help people one day," she thought, as she spent every spare moment working on her latest creation, a life-saving disaster relief robot. 7-year-old Luke Carter had always been fascinated by the world around him, especially when it came to how things worked. He grew up in Detroit, a city with a rich history of innovation and industry. His father, an engineer, often took Luke to work with him, showing him how machines, vehicles, and technologies were designed to solve real-world problems. It was there, watching his dad work on projects, that Luke first became interested in energy. At the age of 5, Luke had built his first wind turbine using scrap wood, old plastic bottles, and a few copper wires. To his amazement, it actually worked. It generated a small amount of electricity. His father had been so impressed that he decided to take Luke's interest seriously. He taught him about solar panels, wind energy, and how they could be used to create sustainable solutions for the future. But it was the idea of clean energy that really lit a fire in Luke's heart. Luke had seen firsthand the effects of pollution and environmental damage in his own city. He knew that, one day, he would find a way to help change the world, to make it cleaner, greener, and more sustainable. The competition announced by Elon Musk was everything Luke had dreamed of. The idea of creating a new form of energy, something that could help solve the world's climate crisis, was a challenge Luke was eager to take on. In fact, he'd already been working on a new type of wind turbine design that could harness power more efficiently than anything that had come before. "I'm going to make a turbine that works even when there's no wind," Luke said to his father one night, as they sat together in the dim light of the garage. His father chuckled. "Well, you'll need to make sure that happens soon, or we'll be seeing windless days for the rest of your childhood." Luke smiled. He wasn't about to let anything stop him. He knew the road ahead would be difficult, but he also knew one thing for sure: the future of the planet depended on young minds like his. He was ready to show the world that kids like him could make a real difference. 8-year-old Emily Nguyen was no stranger to science. Born into a family of doctors and researchers in Boston, Emily had always been surrounded by the language of medicine. Her father, Dr. Min Nguyen, was a renowned oncologist, and her mother, Dr. Ho Nguyen, was a geneticist who worked on groundbreaking gene therapy research. Emily's parents had always fostered a love of science in their home, but it wasn't until she was 5 that Emily found her true passion: biotechnology. It started when her grandmother was diagnosed with cancer. Emily, always the curious one, would sit by her grandmother's side in the hospital, asking questions about the treatments and medications. She wanted to know everything, from how chemotherapy worked to why certain cells in the body mutated and caused cancer. Emily's fascination with the human body grew, and so did her desire to make a difference. One day, while flipping through her mother's research journals, Emily stumbled upon an article about CRISPR, a technology that could edit genes to cure genetic disorders. Emily was hooked. She spent hours learning everything she could about genetic engineering, reading textbooks, and even conducting small experiments in her basement laboratory. Her bedroom was filled with biology books, microscopes, and samples of plant DNA she had been studying for months. Emily wasn't just interested in biology. She was ready to change the way the world treated diseases. When she heard about Elon Musk's competition, Emily knew that this was her chance to create something that could save lives. She had already started developing a biotechnological solution to treat cancer, using gene editing technology to target and destroy harmful cells before they could spread. "This is my moment," Emily thought, as she adjusted her safety goggles and returned to her research. "I'm going to cure diseases." The competition was just days away, and the world was buzzing with anticipation. Media outlets from all over the world were highlighting the young prodigies who had entered the race. People were watching these children, not just as competitors, but as the potential architects of tomorrow's world. In every corner of the globe, there were parents who were both nervous and proud, hopeful that their children would bring forward an idea that could change everything. From social media feeds to news broadcasts, these young minds were becoming overnight sensations, and the eyes of the world were focused on them. Mia, Luke, and Emily, 3 extraordinary children with 3 very different dreams. Yet they all shared one thing in common. They were about to take on the world, armed with nothing but their boundless imagination, determination, and a willingness to change everything. The day had finally arrived. Elon Musk's challenge wasn't just a global event. It was a revolution in the making. It was an opportunity that had never existed before. The chance for children to prove that they could be the driving force behind the next wave of innovation. It wasn't about age or experience. It was about ideas. Big ideas. The kind that could change the world. Mia, Luke, and Emily stood at the threshold of this challenge, each with their own dream. But the first step of the competition would test not just their ideas, but their ability to bring those ideas to life. As they entered the competition headquarters, each of them felt a mixture of excitement and nerves. The world was watching. It wasn't just about winning. It was about showing the world that young minds could make a difference. Mia Alvarez's heart raced as she stepped into the sleek, futuristic building where the competition was being held. Her tiny robot, Robo-Rescue, was carefully packed in a suitcase, ready to be unveiled to the judges. This robot, which he had spent weeks perfecting, was designed to help in disaster recovery situations. It could climb over rubble, assess damage, and even carry supplies to stranded victims. It was everything she had dreamed of. As Mia walked to the designated room, she couldn't help but glance nervously at the other children in the competition. Some of them were older, some were taller, but none of them seemed as driven as she was. Mia knew that she had the knowledge, the creativity, and the heart to win this. But would the judges agree? When her turn came, she entered the large presentation room. Musk himself was seated at the front, surrounded by a panel of scientists, engineers, and innovators. Their eyes were fixed on her as she set up Robo-Rescue. The robot hummed to life, its metal limbs moving with precision. "I present to you Robo-Rescue," Mia said, her voice steady. "This robot is designed to assist rescue teams in disaster zones. It can go places humans can't, like narrow spaces, unstable buildings, or areas with dangerous gases. It's equipped with sensors to detect life forms and assess damage." The judges were silent as they watched Robo-Rescue in action. The robot moved effortlessly over a pile of debris, its sensors flashing as it scanned the environment. It carried a small package over the rubble, demonstrating its ability to deliver essential supplies. Mia's heart raced. She couldn't tell if the judges were impressed or skeptical. The room was quiet, filled only with the hum of Robo-Rescue's movements. Finally, one of the judges, a robotics expert, stood up and clapped slowly. "Impressive work for someone so young," he said, his voice warm. "But can this robot operate in the chaos of a real disaster? What happens when the terrain is unpredictable?" Mia paused. This wasn't the question she had prepared for. She had thought about everything, the design, the sensors, the power source. But she hadn't fully considered the chaos of a real disaster. "I believe it can," she said slowly, gathering her courage. "I've been designing it to be adaptable. In unpredictable environments, it can adjust its movements. It's not just about the robot's capabilities, it's about the software that controls it. I've programmed it with an AI that allows it to learn and adapt in real time." The judge raised an eyebrow. "We'll see if it can handle a real-world scenario. But for now, you've shown that you have potential. Keep working." Mia nodded. The challenge was just beginning, and she knew she had a lot more work ahead of her. But the first step was done, and she had survived it. 7-year-old Luke Carter had always loved the outdoors, especially when it came to harnessing the power of nature. His dream was to create a turbine that could work in any environment, whether there was wind or not. He'd spent months perfecting his design for a wind turbine that could generate power even in the absence of wind. And now, he was about to pitch it to a panel of energy experts. The room was buzzing with excitement as Luke stood in front of his prototype, a sleek device that looked more like a futuristic fan than a power generator. But Luke knew it had the potential to change everything. "Hello, my name is Luke Carter, and I'm here to present a new kind of wind turbine," he began. "One that doesn't rely on wind to generate power. This turbine uses a combination of solar energy, stored kinetic energy, and a novel system that captures even the smallest gusts of air to generate electricity." The judges looked skeptical. They had seen many energy inventions over the years, but nothing quite like this. Luke's turbine wasn't huge, like the ones used to power entire wind farms. It was small, portable, and efficient. Luke carefully activated the turbine, which whirred to life with a soft hum. A small LED light blinked on, indicating that it was generating power. It wasn't much, but it was enough to demonstrate that his system worked. "The real magic happens when the turbine is in motion," Luke continued. "As it captures air, it stores energy in an internal reservoir. Even if there's no wind, the energy that's been stored can be used to generate electricity. The system is designed to work even in environments where wind isn't constant, like cities or desert regions." The judges were impressed, but they had questions. What happens when the turbine is exposed to extreme conditions? What if it gets damaged in a storm? One judge asked. Luke's face lit up. "I've designed it to be modular. If part of it breaks, it can be replaced easily without shutting down the whole system. And the material I used is durable enough to withstand storms. In fact, I've tested it in extreme heat and cold." The panel nodded, clearly impressed with Luke's confidence and knowledge. "Good work," one of the judges said. "You're onto something big." But remember, this is only the beginning. You'll need to test this in the real world to prove its practicality. Luke grinned. I'm ready. I'll make it work. 8-year-old Emily Nguyen was no stranger to high-pressure situations. Growing up in a family of doctors, she had learned early on how to handle difficult situations with grace. But today was different. Today, she wasn't just Emily, the daughter of two renowned scientists. Today, she was Emily the innovator, ready to present her breakthrough in genetic engineering. Emily's project was ambitious. She had developed a technique for using CRISPR technology to target cancer cells, preventing them from mutating and spreading. It wasn't a cure, not yet, but it was a significant step toward a cure. Standing in front of the judges, she felt a wave of nerves wash over her. The room was filled with experts in the field of medicine, and she was just a child. But Emily wasn't intimidated. She had worked for months on her presentation, and she knew that her idea had the potential to save lives. I'm Emily Nguyen, she began, her voice steady. And I've been working on a way to use CRISPR technology to target cancer cells before they have a chance to spread. My technique works by editing the genes responsible for the mutation, stopping them from triggering cancerous growth. The judges listened carefully as Emily explained her process. She had already tested it on plant cells, and the results were promising. The technique worked by recognizing specific markers in cancerous cells and editing their DNA to stop further mutations. One day, I believe this technique could be used in humans, Emily said confidently. I want to create a future where cancer is no longer a death sentence. One of the judges, a prominent oncologist, raised an eyebrow. It's an interesting concept, but CRISPR is still in the early stages. What makes you think this could work in humans? Emily took a deep breath. Because I've already seen it work in plants. And if it works in plants, I believe it can work in humans. It's just a matter of time. The judges exchanged glances. They were impressed, but they knew there was a long road ahead for Emily's research. Good work, Emily, one of them said. You've got a bright future ahead of you. The first round of the competition had been a success, but it was nothing compared to what was coming next. Elon Musk had promised that this challenge wouldn't just test the kids' individual ideas, it would force them to work together in ways they never imagined. The stakes were higher than ever. They were about to face a problem so big, so complex, it would require all their ingenuity and teamwork to solve. The theme of the next round was announced with a bold statement: design a solution to reduce global carbon emissions by 50% within the next decade. The room was filled with gasps. No one had expected a challenge this monumental. Mia, Luke, and Emily had been competing against each other for weeks, each focused on their own ideas and breakthroughs. But now, for the first time, they would be forced to combine their talents and knowledge. There was no more room for individual glory. This was a team challenge. Mia, who had been working on robots for disaster relief, was excited. She'd always believed that technology could be used to help people and the planet, but now she had to think even bigger. Luke, with his passion for clean energy, had already started brainstorming how to integrate solar and wind power into the solution. Emily, with her groundbreaking work in biotechnology, wondered if genetic engineering could help create more efficient plants for carbon capture. But the clock was ticking, and the challenge felt almost impossible. They had just 3 days to come up with a prototype, and the pressure was building. The team was called into a meeting room, where the atmosphere was intense. A giant screen on the wall displayed the challenge question: how do we reduce carbon emissions by 50% in 10 years? We need to come up with something that works on a global scale, said Luke, his voice steady but full of urgency. We can't just focus on one area. We need to think about energy, the environment, and maybe even human biology. Mia nodded. I agree. My robots could play a role in clean energy infrastructure, maybe helping with the installation or maintenance of wind farms or solar panels. But we need to find something that directly tackles the carbon emissions issue. And we don't have time for small solutions. Emily shifted in her seat. What if we think about the problem differently? What if we use my research in biotechnology to create genetically engineered plants that absorb more CO2? I've read about bioengineering solutions to enhance photosynthesis. If we could design a plant that's hyper-efficient at carbon capture, it could make a huge difference. Mia's eyes lit up. That's brilliant. If we can create a plant that captures more carbon, we could use them to cover vast areas of land. and I could design a fleet of robots that would plant, monitor, and maintain these plants. It's a full system, energy generation, and carbon capture. Luke's face broke into a grin. Now that's something I can work with. My turbines could provide the energy to power a network of greenhouses or farming equipment for the plants. We can use solar and wind power to power the entire system, making it carbon neutral or even carbon negative. Emily's eyes sparkled with excitement. And if we can scale this up, we could create entire ecosystems that produce their own energy and remove CO2 from the atmosphere. We're talking about transforming large swathes of land into carbon sinks. It could be a global solution. The idea was forming, but there was a catch. The clock was ticking, and each of them had only 3 days to come up with a working prototype. The next 24 hours were a whirlwind of activity. Each of the kids worked tirelessly, with their minds racing as they tried to bring their collective vision to life. Mia worked on designing a robot prototype capable of planting genetically engineered plants in an efficient, sustainable manner. Her robots would need to operate in tough, unpredictable environments, so they had to be durable and able to plant seeds precisely in large areas, maximizing the rate of carbon capture. Luke focused on integrating renewable energy into the plan. He designed a wind and solar-powered system that could not only support the plant ecosystem but also provide energy for other critical infrastructure. He was keen on developing a turbine that would be scalable, something that could be used both in urban areas and in rural, wide-open spaces. Emily, meanwhile, dove deep into the genetic engineering aspect of the project. She was testing various plant strains in her lab to see which ones could potentially be enhanced to absorb more carbon. The key was to use CRISPR technology to make the plants grow faster and become more efficient in photosynthesis. Despite their excitement, there were moments of tension. Mia had trouble getting her robots to move fast enough to plant the seeds at the rate they needed. Luke's turbines weren't generating the power he had anticipated, and Emily wasn't seeing the results she wanted from her initial genetic modifications. Each failure felt like a setback, but none of them were willing to give up. Late into the first night, Emily sat at the table, exhausted, staring at the results of her plant tests. Her eyes were heavy, but her mind was still racing. "What if," she muttered, scribbling on a piece of paper, "what if we combine genetic engineering with rapid plant growth techniques? I could use a growth hormone combined with CRISPR to make the plants grow faster and absorb more CO2 in less time." She picked up the phone and called Mia and Luke. "I have an idea. What if we can accelerate plant growth so that it's usable in the first few months instead of waiting years for full-grown trees?" Mia's voice crackled through the speaker. "That could work. If we can get the robots planting faster and the plants are more effective, we could potentially see results in less time." Luke added, "I'm working on building a storage unit for the energy generated. If we can get a feedback loop from the energy to the plant system, the entire project could be self-sustaining." With renewed energy, they dove back into their work. By day 2, the team was tired but determined. They had all encountered problems, technical malfunctions, biological complications, and logistical hurdles, but they were determined to push through. Mia's robots were now able to plant seeds with incredible precision, but there were still issues with terrain. Some of the testing sites had rocky, uneven surfaces, and the robots were struggling to navigate. Mia made adjustments to their sensors and arm mechanisms, ensuring they could work in any environment. Luke's turbines were now performing better, generating enough energy to power the plant-growing systems. He had built a network of solar panels to assist when the wind wasn't strong enough, ensuring the entire system could run sustainably. Meanwhile, Emily's plants had finally started showing promise. She had successfully engineered a strain of plants that could grow faster than typical species, absorbing CO2 at a higher rate than natural plants. But the real challenge was scaling them for widespread use. As the sun began to set on the second day, the team realized they were running out of time. But they had a breakthrough, a way to integrate all their systems into one working prototype. On the final day of the challenge, Mia, Luke, and Emily worked frantically. They merged their inventions into one cohesive system, a fleet of robots that planted genetically engineered carbon-absorbing plants, powered by Luke's wind and solar energy systems, all monitored and maintained by artificial intelligence. The prototype was ready. It was rough around the edges, but it worked. Mia's robots were able to plant seeds in the toughest environments, while Luke's turbines and solar panels powered the entire operation. Emily's genetically engineered plants were poised to absorb carbon at a scale that could change the world. When the judges arrived to see their final presentation, the team felt a mix of nervousness and pride. They were exhausted, but they knew they had done something extraordinary. They had done it. They had created a prototype that had the potential to change the world. But as they stood in front of the massive testing field, the reality hit them. This was no longer a simple competition in a controlled lab. This was the real world. And in the real world, nothing was guaranteed. Mia, Luke, and Emily had just 48 hours to demonstrate that their carbon-reducing system could work on a large scale and under conditions that no one could have predicted. No more prototypes. No more assumptions. This was the ultimate test of their vision, their ability to adapt, and their determination. The testing site was in the heart of the Nevada desert, a vast expanse of dry, cracked earth stretched out before them, the wind whipping through the empty space. It was the perfect place to test their carbon capture and renewable energy system. If it could work here, it could work anywhere. But the harsh conditions, extreme heat, unpredictable wind, and scarce water, were also their greatest challenge. "This is it," Mia said, adjusting the straps on her backpack. "If we can get this system up and running here, we'll prove it can work in any environment." Luke adjusted his sunglasses and surveyed the area. "I think the turbines will work well here. The wind is steady enough, and we've got plenty of sun for the solar panels." Emily, holding a clipboard with plant growth data, nodded. "I'm confident the plants can thrive in these conditions too. We've engineered them to survive extreme temperatures, and we've been able to grow them in low-water environments." But as they set to work, they quickly realized that theory and practice weren't the same thing. The terrain was rocky and uneven, making it difficult for Mia's robots to navigate. Some of the seeds weren't sprouting as quickly as they had expected, and the wind turbines weren't generating the amount of energy they had planned for. Worst of all, a heat wave hit the desert, pushing temperatures above 110 degrees Fahrenheit, 43 degrees Celsius, threatening to kill off their plants before they could even start growing. Mia watched with a growing sense of frustration as her robots struggled to plant seeds. The sand and rocky terrain made it nearly impossible for them to move smoothly. Some of the robots got stuck, their wheels spinning uselessly, while others had trouble adjusting to the uneven ground. "This is a nightmare," Mia muttered, kneeling beside one of her robots. "We need to adjust their sensors to handle this rough terrain." Luke approached, sweating in the desert heat. "The turbines are having trouble, too. The wind's unpredictable out here. 1 minute, it's calm, and the next minute, it's gusting. We need to recalibrate the wind sensors." Emily, who had been carefully monitoring the plant growth, looked up from her notes. "The heat's taking a toll on the plants, too. They're not growing as fast as we hoped. I was counting on them to help with the carbon capture. If this keeps up, they could die before they're even able to take in significant CO2. Mia felt a surge of frustration. Everything they had worked for, all their preparation, seemed to be falling apart. But as she looked at Luke and Emily, she realized one thing. They couldn't afford to quit. There was no time to waste. They had to fix these problems, and fast. Mia returned to her robots, taking a deep breath. "I think I've been focusing too much on their speed. They need to be more stable on uneven surfaces. If we can recalibrate the motors and adjust the sensors for more precise movement, we can get them planting without getting stuck." Luke had already set to work on the wind turbines. "I'm going to adjust the blade angle and recalibrate the wind sensors. The gusts here are erratic, but we can still generate power if we can track the wind patterns more accurately." Emily took a different approach to the plants. "I'll start applying a special growth compound. It'll help the plants handle the heat better and grow more quickly in this desert climate. I've got a backup plan to make sure they're ready for the long haul." Each of them worked tirelessly, focusing on their specific area of expertise. They knew they couldn't afford to make any more mistakes. Every minute counted. Just as they were starting to make progress, the weather took a turn for the worse. A dust storm rolled in without warning, the wind howling and sending clouds of dust into the air. Visibility dropped to near zero, and the temperature spiked even higher. The turbines were immediately rendered useless, their blades spinning uncontrollably in the gusts. Mia's robots were also caught in the storm. their sensors overloaded and malfunctioning as sand and dust entered their internal components. "We've lost control of everything," Luke shouted, trying to shield his face from the sand. "The turbines are useless in this storm, and the robots are completely disabled." Emily gritted her teeth, her eyes narrowing against the blowing sand. "The plants won't survive this either. They need stability to grow. We've got to find a way to protect them." In the midst of the chaos, Mia refused to give up. "We can't let this storm defeat us. We have to adapt right now." She grabbed a spare tarp from her bag and ran to the area where the plants were located. "If we can cover the plants and create a temporary shelter, we might be able to shield them from the worst of the storm." Luke followed her, grabbing materials to reinforce the wind turbines. "I'll secure the turbines and try to reorient them so they don't get damaged." Emily, ever the strategist, was already planning her next move. "The plants need water. We can't rely on the heat to make them grow anymore. I've got a way to funnel water from the small reserves we have left. If we can irrigate them, they'll survive this." Hours passed before the storm finally subsided. Exhausted and covered in dust, the team emerged from their makeshift shelters. The sun was beginning to set, and the desert was eerily calm again. The first thing they checked was the plant growth. Despite the storm, the growth compound Emily had applied had kept the plants alive. Though they hadn't grown as quickly as expected, they had survived the worst of the heat and dust. Luke's wind turbines, although battered, had been reoriented to withstand the gusts. While they hadn't generated as much power as they had hoped, they were still functional. The solar panels had picked up the slack, providing enough energy to keep the system running. Mia's robots, though damaged, were still operational. She had reprogrammed them to handle the rugged terrain, and they were now able to plant the seeds with more precision. It hadn't been easy, but they had made it through the worst of it. The system wasn't perfect, far from it, but it was alive. By the time the judges arrived for the final presentation, Mia, Luke, and Emily were exhausted. Their clothes were stained with dust, and their faces were grim from the long hours of testing and adapting. But they were proud of what they had accomplished. Mia stood at the front, looking at her team. "We've done it. We've built a system that can work in extreme environments, harnessing renewable energy and using genetically engineered plants to capture carbon. It's not perfect, but it's a start." Luke added, "This system can scale from deserts to cities. It's adaptable, sustainable, and capable of making a real impact." Emily's voice was steady but full of conviction. "And the plants? They're alive. They've survived extreme temperatures and a dust storm. We've shown that this technology can work even under the harshest conditions." The judges looked impressed. "You've faced setbacks and adapted in real time," one of them said. "That's exactly the kind of innovation we need." The applause from the judges was still ringing in their ears, but the team knew the hardest part was yet to come. Elon Musk's voice echoed in their minds as he announced the next phase. "You've proven your system can work in extreme conditions. Now, it's time to scale it. You have 72 hours to demonstrate how this prototype can be applied on a global scale, from cities to remote regions, from deserts to the Arctic. Can you make it work for billions of people?" It was the ultimate test of their idea. Could they really create a solution that could solve the world's carbon crisis, or would the pressures of scale prove too much? The team had just finished their presentation, and they were feeling a mix of pride and exhaustion. After the dust storm and all the technical difficulties, they had proven that their system was functional in one extreme environment. But now they had to prove it could work on a much larger scale. They gathered in their temporary command center, a whiteboard covered with ideas and sketches. The task was daunting. How could they adapt their carbon capture system to work in both dense urban environments and remote, barren landscapes? The complexity of scaling their project was overwhelming. "All right," Mia said, breaking the silence. "We know the prototype works in the desert, but now we need to think bigger. This system has to work anywhere, not just in one place. We're talking about the entire planet." Luke was already tapping away on a laptop, his brow furrowed. "I've been looking at urban areas, places like New York, London, and Mumbai. We've got millions of people living in those cities. How can we make sure we generate enough energy and capture enough carbon without disrupting their daily lives?" Emily paced around the room, flipping through her notes. The plants worked in the desert, but cities are a different beast. There's limited space for large-scale planting and a lot of pollution. We need a way to integrate our system with urban infrastructure without making things worse. Mia rubbed her temples. And then there's the issue of remote areas, places like the Arctic or tropical rainforests. We need to create a system that's adaptable to different climates and terrains. If we just focus on one environment, we're missing the point. The pressure was mounting. Their initial system had worked, but that didn't mean it could work everywhere. They needed a solution that would scale seamlessly across multiple environments, from crowded cities to isolated regions where resources were scarce. As the hours passed, frustration began to set in. They couldn't seem to find a way to merge the technical aspects of their system in a way that would work for both the urban and rural environments. Then, as the conversation turned to urban spaces and the challenge of fitting everything into small, crowded spaces, Emily had an idea. "What if we make the system modular?" she asked, her voice sharp with realization. "Instead of a one-size-fits-all solution, what if we could break it down into smaller units, ones that could be customized to fit different environments?" Luke's eyes lit up. "I see what you mean. We could have smaller units for cities that work alongside existing infrastructure, like buildings, roads, and parks. These units could use compact turbines, solar panels, and genetically engineered plants to reduce carbon emissions. And then in rural or extreme environments, we could scale up the units to cover larger areas." Mia was quick to follow up. "Yeah, in cities, we could integrate the system into the architecture. Imagine wind turbines on top of skyscrapers, solar panels on rooftops, and bioengineering plants in urban parks. These units could also be used to clean polluted air and help with waste management. In more remote areas, like forests or deserts, we could use larger, more robust systems that focus on carbon capture and renewable energy generation." Emily nodded, already working through the logistics in her head. "We can create an interconnected grid of these modular systems. They would share energy and data, optimizing their performance based on the surrounding environment. It's adaptable." Luke grinned. "We could even create an AI system to monitor and adjust each module in real time, ensuring efficiency no matter where it is. That way, every unit, whether in a city or a rural region, could work as part of a global network." Mia stood up, looking excited. "That's the key, scalability and adaptability. If we can get this modular system right, we can take it anywhere. We can tackle both pollution in cities and deforestation in the Amazon. This could be our solution to climate change." With the clock ticking, the team jumped into action. They had 72 hours to prove their modular system could work. Mia worked on designing the small, compact robots that would fit into the urban environments. These robots would plant genetically engineered plants on rooftops and in parks, creating vertical gardens that could absorb CO2 and provide green space in cities. She also began programming the AI system to optimize the robots' movements, allowing them to work in tandem with the other units. Luke worked on the renewable energy aspects. He designed smaller turbines and solar panels that could be installed on buildings and other urban infrastructure. The modular energy units would be capable of generating enough power to run the entire system, while also being easy to maintain and scale. He also integrated a battery storage system, ensuring that the energy could be stored for use during low wind or cloudy days. Emily focused on scaling the genetic engineering of the plants. She experimented with creating more efficient plants that could grow in smaller spaces and handle the different environmental conditions found in urban areas. At the same time, she worked on larger plant systems for more remote regions. These plants had to be more robust, capable of growing in extreme heat, cold, and low-water environments. The team worked feverishly, testing their ideas as they went. The pressure was immense, but they were more determined than ever. By the second day, the modular units were starting to take shape. Mia's robots had been adjusted for urban environments, with the ability to plant and maintain small garden spaces on rooftops and in public parks. Luke's turbines and solar panels were connected to the system, providing enough energy to power the AI and robotics. Emily's plants had been genetically engineered to thrive in urban spaces, growing quickly and capturing carbon efficiently. However, they weren't without their challenges. The robots needed to be more efficient in crowded spaces. Some of the solar panels weren't generating enough power in urban areas with limited sunlight. And the plants, while efficient in capturing carbon, were struggling to thrive in areas with high pollution. Emily was deep in thought as she examined the plant data. We need to accelerate their growth. These plants can't wait years to mature. We need them to grow faster, so they can start absorbing more CO2 immediately. Mia looked over at the prototype robots. I'm worried that the robots aren't planting the seeds in the optimal spots. We need to make sure the plants are getting the right amount of sunlight, especially in crowded urban areas. Luke, who had been monitoring the turbines, said, "The wind energy isn't consistent enough in cities. We're going to need to add more solar panels to supplement the power generation." The final day of the challenge arrived, and the team was exhausted but determined. They had worked through the night, making adjustments to the system and testing their modules. The results were promising. Mia's robots were planting the genetically engineered plants with more precision, ensuring they were getting the right amount of sunlight and space to grow. Luke had added more solar panels, optimizing their efficiency in urban environments. Emily had accelerated the plant growth by applying a special BioBoost compound, ensuring they could start absorbing carbon faster. Now, the team had to integrate everything into a global system. They connected the modular units to a centralized AI network, which would allow them to share energy and data across the world. Whether in New York, Mumbai, or the Arctic, each unit would adapt to its environment and work as part of a larger, interconnected network. The judges arrived, and the team was ready to present their solution. They had successfully created a scalable, adaptable system that could work in cities and rural areas, harnessing renewable energy and utilizing genetically engineered plants to reduce carbon emissions. "This is just the beginning," Emily said, as she presented the final prototype. "We've created a system that can be scaled and adapted to any environment, from the crowded streets of New York to the remote deserts of Africa. We're talking about a global solution to climate change." Luke added, "Our system is interconnected. Each module communicates with the others, optimizing energy generation and carbon capture in real time. This isn't just a theory, it's a working solution." Mia finished, "We've proven that we can create a system that works anywhere. It's efficient, adaptable, and scalable, and it can change the world." The judges were impressed. They saw the potential of the modular system, and they knew that this was the kind of innovation the world needed. It all happened so fast. One moment, Mia, Luke, and Emily were basking in the glow of their successful modular prototype. The world seemed ready to embrace their innovation, and just when they thought they had the solution in hand, a disaster struck. A series of unprecedented natural disasters ravaged parts of the world, from wildfires raging through California to floods sweeping across Southeast Asia. Climate change was accelerating at an alarming rate, and world governments were scrambling for a solution. Then came the announcement. The global carbon levels have reached an all-time high. A massive climate shift is predicted within weeks. If nothing is done now, humanity could face irreversible damage to ecosystems and agriculture. We need a solution, and we need it fast. It was the wake-up call the world didn't want, but it was the one that Mia, Luke, and Emily had been preparing for. The real test had begun. The world was watching. It was a week after the disaster announcements, and the team was already back at the command center. The pressure of the crisis weighed heavily on them. Governments around the world had contacted them, offering funding and resources to deploy their system, but the clock was ticking. "We've proven that the system can scale, but we didn't anticipate this," Luke said, running a hand through his hair. "These natural disasters, they're happening so fast. We need to deploy our units before the global ecosystem collapses." Mia nodded, her mind racing. "We can't just focus on energy or carbon capture anymore. We need to help with the immediate aftermath of these disasters. Wildfires are burning too quickly for traditional methods to put them out. Flooding is washing away crops, wiping out entire communities." Emily added, her voice steady but determined, "We need to adjust our system to provide more than just a carbon capture solution. It needs to be a disaster recovery system too. Can our modules adapt to rescue and help rebuild these areas?" The team was quiet for a moment. They had designed their modular units to reduce carbon emissions and generate renewable energy, but they hadn't planned for natural disaster recovery on such a massive scale. The solution would need to be flexible, adaptable, and multifunctional. "Let's brainstorm," Mia said. We need to make sure our system can do more than just capture carbon. It needs to provide real-time responses to these disasters. The first step was rethinking the core functionality of their modular system. Originally, each module was designed to either generate energy, clean the air, or capture carbon, depending on its environment. Now, they had to create a multifunctional system that could provide disaster recovery in addition to these tasks. Luke worked on upgrading the energy generation capacity. We can use the turbines to generate enough energy for local relief efforts, especially in areas with power outages. We can also use the solar panels to power desalination plants in areas hit by flooding. Mia focused on adapting the robots. We can add new tools to the robots to help with rescue operations. Maybe we can outfit them with sensors that can detect survivors in collapsed buildings or flood zones. We can also use them to deliver emergency supplies. Emily was deep in thought as she flipped through her plant growth data. I've been experimenting with plants that can help in the aftermath of natural disasters. Some plants can be used for erosion control, while others can purify contaminated water. We need to make sure we integrate them into our system, so they can be deployed immediately after a disaster. The key to their new design was flexibility. Each module would be equipped with a range of functions that could be adapted to the specific needs of the disaster zone. It wasn't long before their first test arrived. The wildfires that had ravaged California were still burning out of control. The team had been contacted by the government. Their solution was needed, and it was needed fast. The team rushed to prepare their first deployment. Mia's robots were loaded onto trucks and sent to the fire zone, where they would be used to clear fire breaks and help contain the flames. Luke's energy modules were sent to power water pumps and emergency systems. Emily's plants were dispatched to areas that had been burned to prevent soil erosion and help with reforestation. But as the fire worsened, the team realized the scale of the problem. The wildfires weren't just destroying homes. They were also disrupting the atmosphere, creating dangerous smoke clouds and increasing carbon emissions. It became clear that their system needed to act fast if they were to stop the worst effects of the fires. The team faced a new problem. Time was running out. The fire was spreading faster than expected. Mia's robots, while effective in clearing debris and preparing fire breaks, couldn't keep up with the sheer scale of the firestorm. Luke's energy modules could power water pumps, but they weren't generating enough electricity to combat the fires directly. Emily's plants, although capable of preventing erosion, couldn't regenerate the forests quickly enough to restore the natural balance. "We need to rethink our approach," Luke said, his voice tense. "We can't rely on just one aspect of the system. We need more energy generation and faster deployment." Emily added, "We also need to be able to create a barrier, something that can stop the spread of fire more effectively. If we could deploy a fast-growing, fire-resistant plant barrier along the perimeter, we could slow the fire long enough for emergency responders to catch up." Mia's mind was racing as she looked at the map of the fire's path. "And we need to bring in more robots to help. We need a system that can autonomously adjust based on the shifting patterns of the fire. We can't just deploy everything in one spot. We need the ability to deploy where the fire is moving next." The answer came from an unlikely place. Luke, as usual, was tinkering with the AI system. As the fire continued to spread, he integrated a new algorithm that allowed the system to adjust in real time. The AI would be able to detect fire behavior, including wind shifts, temperature changes, and fire movement, and adjust the deployment of robots, energy units, and plant systems accordingly. "This should do it," Luke said, grinning as he uploaded the update to the central system. "The AI will track the fire and automatically deploy the robots where they're needed most, the energy units to power rescue teams, and the plants to prevent erosion and slow the fire." Mia and Emily quickly made adjustments to their systems. They could now deploy a dynamic, adaptive solution that wasn't just responding to the fire but actively preventing its spread and mitigating its impact. As the fire burned, the system began to deploy in real time. Mia's robots worked tirelessly, clearing debris and creating fire breaks in the fire's path. Luke's energy units powered water pumps and firefighting equipment, while Emily's fire-resistant plants created a barrier that slowed the fire long enough for emergency teams to make headway. The fire raged for days, but thanks to their quick thinking and adaptive system, the team was able to help contain it in critical areas. The combination of renewable energy, carbon capture, and disaster recovery worked better than expected. It's working, Mia said, watching the progress unfold. We've actually slowed the fire down enough for them to get control. Luke and Emily exchanged a look of relief. It wasn't perfect, but it was a success. As the fire finally came under control, the team was contacted by more governments around the world. The success in California had caught the attention of major climate organizations, and the team had proven that their system could do more than just reduce carbon emissions. It could be a vital part of disaster recovery. But as the team prepared for the next disaster, they knew that their work was just beginning. This was the first of many tests, and the real challenge was scaling this solution on a global level, where natural disasters and climate change were happening faster than anyone had anticipated. They had proven their system could save lives, but could it save the planet? The pressure was mounting. Just as the team thought they had a handle on one global crisis, another emerged. News reports from around the world were filled with footage of entire coastal cities, from Miami to Manila, from Jakarta to Venice, battling unprecedented flooding. Entire neighborhoods were underwater. People were losing homes, livelihoods, and lives. The situation was dire, and the impact of rising sea levels was being felt faster than anyone had predicted. Elon Musk's words echoed in Mia's mind as she stared at the ocean on the screen. Your technology is impressive, but can it stop the rising tides? The sea levels are going to keep rising. You have the chance to make a real impact, but only if you can adapt your system to protect the coasts. The team was in their command center once again, staring at the data pouring in from all over the globe. Rising sea levels were now one of the most urgent problems on the planet. Coastal cities were being flooded, and the constant threat of storm surges had become a daily concern. It wasn't just about saving lives. It was about saving whole ecosystems and industries, fisheries, agriculture, tourism, and more. This is even worse than I thought, Emily said, scrolling through the reports on her tablet. We're talking about millions of people being displaced. Some of these cities will be uninhabitable within decades if we don't act fast. Luke nodded grimly. The flooding is relentless, and it's only going to get worse. We need a way to stop this before we lose entire cities. Mia took a deep breath. We've built a system that works in deserts, cities, and forests. But now we need to take it to the coasts. We need to figure out how to use our technology to prevent flooding, protect infrastructure, and give these cities a fighting chance against the rising tides. The team knew they had to adapt their solution to face the rising seas, not just with carbon capture or energy generation, but with real, tangible protection against the encroaching water. The stakes were higher than ever. They gathered around a whiteboard, sketching ideas for how their modular units could be used to protect coastal cities. Mia was the first to speak. We need to think about physical barriers. If we could deploy flood walls or sea barriers using our modular units, that would help prevent water from flooding the cities. But we can't just build walls. They need to be smart. They need to respond in real time to tides and storms. Emily was already typing furiously, running simulations. What if we could use our plant systems to help reinforce these flood walls? Some plants are known to help stabilize soil and prevent erosion, even in salty environments. We could engineer a species of plant that could grow along these walls, creating natural barriers to absorb the impact of the water. Luke jumped in. And we could use the AI system we've developed to monitor the ocean's rise. If we could connect the modular units to tidal sensors, the AI could predict storm surges and adjust the barriers accordingly, deploying more units or reinforcing weaker points. Mia's eyes brightened as she added, we could also install renewable energy systems along these flood walls to power pumps that keep water levels under control. The energy could be used to run desalination plants and floodwater management systems. The team began to refine the plan. It wasn't just about stopping water from rising. They needed to prepare for the long-term effects, strengthening coastlines, preventing erosion, and protecting vital infrastructure. The first test came quickly. The city of Miami had just been hit by a massive storm surge. Coastal flooding had overwhelmed the city's outdated flood defenses, and the authorities were desperate for help. The team was called in. Their task: deploy their modular systems to reinforce Miami's coastline before the next round of storms arrived. They had a limited window, a matter of days, to make a difference. We're going to need to move fast, Mia said, organizing the teams. We've already mapped out the key areas that need reinforcement. Let's get to work. Emily and Luke worked on adapting their existing plant and energy systems for the coastal environment. We're going to need salt-tolerant plants that can help stabilize the shoreline. Plus, we need to make sure the energy units are powerful enough to sustain the pumps and flood control systems. We don't want any failure during a storm surge. The team deployed the first batch of modular units to Miami's coastline. These units were equipped with solar panels, tidal energy converters, and desalination systems. They also carried flood barriers, which were designed to rise automatically in response to the rising tides. "Here we go," Luke said, as they sent the first wave of units into the water. "The AI will handle the rest." The units moved with precision, creating temporary seawalls along the coast, designed to protect the city's most vulnerable neighborhoods. As the units connected to the city's flood control system, the AI began to monitor the tide levels, preparing to deploy additional barriers if needed. The storm came harder than anyone expected. By the evening, Miami was experiencing a full-fledged hurricane with high winds and massive waves. The team watched anxiously from their command center as the flood levels began to rise faster than anticipated. "Here it comes," Mia said, staring at the flood gauge on the screen. "The water's going to reach the critical levels in an hour. We need to deploy more barriers." Luke's fingers flew over the keyboard, adjusting the AI system. "We've got this. The system is capable of auto-deploying more units, but we need to make sure it's tracking the storm surge." The AI system kicked into action. Additional flood barriers were deployed in real time, reinforcing the existing ones as the water levels climbed. The units automatically adjusted their positions to form a continuous line of defense, adapting to the shifting tides. Emily focused on the plant systems. "The plants need to grow quickly. We can't wait for them to root naturally. We need to apply the growth accelerator we've been testing." Within hours, the plant systems began to stabilize the soil along the flood walls, preventing erosion. The salt-tolerant plants took root, providing an extra layer of defense that strengthened the walls and absorbed excess water. As the storm raged on, the modular units held their ground. The city's flood defenses were reinforced, the energy systems powered the pumps and desalination units, and the plants grew rapidly, reinforcing the shoreline. By the time the storm passed, the damage to Miami was minimal compared to what it could have been. The modular systems had worked. "It worked," Luke said, exhausted but relieved. "We did it." The barriers held up, and the plants stabilized the shoreline. The city was spared. Emily nodded. "It's not just the flood walls. The whole system worked together. We're generating clean energy, preventing erosion, and even providing clean water. This could be the solution for every coastal city on the planet." Mia smiled, though the weight of the challenge was far from over. "We've proven that it works on a local level, but now we need to scale it. Miami is just one city. We need to protect every coastline." The team knew they had made a major breakthrough, but the challenge ahead was monumental. Coastal cities around the world were under threat, and the rising tides weren't slowing down. Could they scale their system to protect entire countries, or even continents? The world was watching. After their success in Miami, the team had become global heroes. Every coastal city, every nation on the brink of disaster, was calling for help. The team was no longer dealing with isolated problems. They were now faced with a global crisis, one that required a solution that could scale quickly and effectively. Governments were offering unprecedented funding, and climate organizations were ready to deploy their system, but there was one problem. How could they build it fast enough to protect the entire world? The team sat in their command center, facing the enormity of their task. Mia, Luke, and Emily had always known their work could change the world, but now they were realizing just how big the stakes were. "Miami was just the beginning," Luke said, staring at the endless sea of data streaming in. "We need to deploy our system to every coastal city that's at risk. But the logistics of that, it's a nightmare." Mia sighed, rubbing her temples. "We're talking about hundreds of miles of coastline. Every city is unique. We can't just send a one-size-fits-all solution. We need to adapt for every region. For some places, it's hurricanes. For others, it's rising sea levels or storm surges." Emily, ever the optimist, leaned forward. "We have the technology to make it work. We've already designed a modular system that adapts. Now we need to scale it. We'll need massive production, and we need it fast." Mia nodded. We also need to consider the political landscape. Some countries are going to be more willing to cooperate than others. We need to build partnerships with governments and organizations that understand the urgency. The task ahead was overwhelming, but the team was united in their commitment. They had proven their system worked. Now they had to prove it could work on a global scale. The first step was ramping up production. The team had already partnered with several manufacturing companies, but the demand for their modular systems was unlike anything they'd ever seen. They needed to produce thousands, if not millions, of units in a fraction of the time it would take for traditional infrastructure projects. Luke took charge of the technical side. We can optimize our manufacturing processes. We already have designs for modular units, but we need to automate production to keep up with demand. If we make this scalable, we can build systems in multiple countries at once. Emily was focused on refining the plant-based modules. We'll need to find sustainable materials that can be rapidly deployed to different regions. For example, some coastal areas may require salt-resistant plants, while others may need erosion control vegetation that grows quickly. Meanwhile, Mia worked on coordinating logistics. We need to form alliances with global shipping companies and local governments. If we can't get the units to the right places, nothing else will matter. And we need to make sure they can be deployed rapidly when they get there. They were building not just a technological solution, they were building a global operation. The first international test came from Bangladesh. The small nation was facing devastating storm surges and rising sea levels, and the government reached out, hoping the team's system could save their coastal cities. The team knew this was their chance to prove the global scalability of their system. "We've got the units ready," Mia said, packing up her equipment. "We're sending the first shipment of modular units to Bangladesh today." Emily looked over the deployment plan. "We need to make sure we're focusing on the most vulnerable areas. Some of the coastal communities are already partially submerged." Luke was in the command center, running final tests on the AI systems. The AI will have to monitor the storm patterns in real time. We'll need to deploy more units in response to shifting tides, and the plant systems will need to grow quickly to stabilize the coastline. Mia gave the team one last look. "Remember, this is more than just technology. This is about saving lives. We're doing something that no one thought was possible, creating a sustainable future for these communities." The team's system arrived in Bangladesh just as a major storm was heading toward the coastline. The units were deployed, and the modular systems went to work. The flood barriers, powered by solar and tidal energy, rose along the coastline in preparation for the storm surge. The robots deployed the first wave of salt-resistant plants, anchoring the coastline against erosion. At the same time, desalination units began operating, providing fresh water to flooded communities. But the storm hit harder than expected. Mia and Luke were watching the storm's path in real time. "We're going to need more units," Luke said urgently. "The surge is bigger than we anticipated." The AI quickly adapted, deploying additional barriers and energy systems where they were needed most. The plant-based modules began to grow more rapidly, bolstered by a new accelerator that Emily had designed specifically for high-water environments. It was all hands on deck, and the team was pushing the limits of their system. But even with all their preparation, the flooding was severe. Parts of the coastline were still at risk. The team had to think quickly. Mia stared at the data. The water's rising faster than expected. The system can't deploy units fast enough to keep up with the tide. But what if we use our robots to build temporary barriers out of local materials? Emily's eyes widened. Brilliant. We can't just rely on the standard system. We can use the robots to improvise solutions on the ground, using sandbags, debris, anything they can find. It's like creating an emergency flood barrier that adjusts based on what's available. Luke quickly implemented the change. The AI instructed the robots to use their sensors to scan the environment for materials that could help. It wasn't perfect, but the robots were able to quickly adapt, building additional barriers in the areas where they were most needed. Within hours, the storm surge began to subside. The barriers held, the energy units powered the local grid, and the plant systems stabilized the shoreline. The floodwaters started to recede, and the robots continued to reinforce weak points, making real-time adjustments. The storm eventually passed, and Bangladesh had weathered the worst of it. The team had managed to deploy their system in record time, and while the damage was significant, the The response had saved countless lives and prevented more widespread destruction. The system worked, Luke said, breathing a sigh of relief. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough. We bought the people of Bangladesh time to rebuild. Mia smiled. We proved that it can scale. But this is just one country. We need to deploy our solution everywhere. From Indonesia to the Netherlands, from the Philippines to the US. We need to be ready for the next storm, the next crisis. Emily looked at the screen, showing rising water levels in other coastal cities around the world. We have the technology, we have the resources, and we have the data. Now we just need the will to act. The world was on the edge. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Scientists had been warning for decades, but it wasn't until now that the world truly understood the gravity of the situation. The ice caps were melting at an unprecedented rate, and with it, the sea levels were rising faster than anyone had predicted. The impacts were already devastating, with entire countries at risk of being submerged within the next few decades. Mia, Luke, and Emily had successfully helped protect coastal cities, but the true challenge was only beginning. What if they couldn't stop the rising oceans? Could their technology scale to not just slow the flooding, but stop it altogether? And what if they ran out of time? The team sat in their command center, watching a news broadcast that sent a chill down their spines. Satellite images showed a massive chunk of the Antarctic ice shelf breaking off, releasing billions of tons of fresh water into the ocean. The global sea levels were set to rise even faster than previously feared. The Antarctic ice shelf is destabilizing, Emily said, her voice tight. The flood risk is about to increase exponentially. If this continues, we're looking at a major crisis in just a few years, not decades. Luke glanced at the satellite data streaming across the screen. The situation is worse than anyone imagined. These ice sheets are disappearing faster than we can handle. This isn't just about protecting coastal cities anymore. We need to think about how to deal with mass migration, agriculture failure, and the displacement of millions of people. Mia clenched her fists, knowing the urgency of the situation. We need to scale up again. But more than that, we need to develop a new kind of solution. If the ice sheets keep melting, we're looking at a massive increase in ocean volume. Our current barriers and technology may not be enough. The stakes had never been higher. They had to act now, before it was too late. The team spent the next several days analyzing the data and refining their approach. They couldn't just rely on temporary barriers or desalination units anymore. They needed a long-term solution that could handle the kind of rapid sea level rise that was now occurring. We need to figure out how to slow the rate of ice melt, Luke suggested, staring at a map of the polar regions. The faster the ice melts, the harder it will be to protect coastal cities. Can we develop a system that could help cool the regions down, or at least slow the thawing process? Emily was already researching potential technologies. I've been looking into geoengineering solutions. Some researchers are proposing techniques to reflect sunlight away from the ice sheets to prevent them from melting so quickly. We could integrate that into our system. If we can stop the ice from melting faster, we might have a fighting chance. Mia thought for a moment. It's a long shot, but maybe we can combine our system with other geoengineering technologies. We're already dealing with large-scale climate solutions, so it's not too far of a stretch. We can't afford to ignore any possibility. The team agreed. Their work had always been about combining technology, sustainability, and adaptability. Now they had to push the boundaries even further. The first test of their new idea came from an unlikely source, the Arctic nations, including Canada, Norway, and Russia. These countries, directly impacted by the rapid melting of the ice caps, were desperate for a solution. Mia and the team were invited to collaborate on a geoengineering project that would attempt to slow the ice melt in the Arctic. This is our chance, Mia said. If we can prove our technology can help slow the ice melt, we might have a real chance to scale up. But this is uncharted territory. We don't know if it'll work. Emily worked tirelessly to combine the modular systems with solar reflectors, bioengineering solutions, and high-tech cooling systems. The goal was to deploy these units in the Arctic, focusing on the most vulnerable parts of the ice sheets. We'll need to monitor the temperature of the ice sheets in real time, Luke said, setting up the AI systems. The cooling units will need to adjust based on the local temperature and weather conditions. The reflectors will block some of the sun's energy, but we can't be sure how it will affect the ice over the long term. Mia stood at the front of the room, addressing the team. This is a test of everything we've built. If we can slow the ice melt here, it gives us a new tool in our arsenal to combat rising sea levels. But we need to be ready for failure. This is a new frontier. The deployment in the Arctic was challenging from the start. The team arrived in northern Canada, where the ice sheets were melting rapidly. The temperatures were colder than any of them had ever experienced, and the logistics of getting the necessary equipment into such a remote area was a feat in itself. "We've got the units in position," Emily reported as she reviewed the satellite images. "The modular systems are being integrated with the solar reflectors and the cooling systems. Now we just need to get the sensors up and running to monitor the ice." Luke was already setting up the AI to begin adjusting the systems in real time. The hardest part is going to be measuring the effectiveness of this system. The ice is moving, shifting, and melting at different rates in different places. But if we can reduce the rate of melt, even by a little, it will make a huge difference. Mia watched from the command center, her eyes focused on the screens. The team's technology was running smoothly, and the cooling systems and solar reflectors were doing their jobs. But the real test would be whether they could truly slow the melting of the ice sheets. Over the next several weeks, the team monitored the progress. The cooling systems were working as expected, and the solar reflectors had reduced the amount of heat absorbed by the ice. But the biggest breakthrough came when their technology was able to stabilize the flow of meltwater. "We're seeing results," Emily said, reviewing the data. "The melt rate has decreased by 12%. It's not a huge number, but it's a start. And it's exactly what we need to begin scaling this solution." Luke was cautiously optimistic. Slowing the melt is just the first step. Now we need to figure out how to keep the ice from melting entirely. If we can reduce the overall volume of meltwater entering the oceans, we might be able to stop the tide from rising. Mia's heart lifted. This is the breakthrough we've been waiting for. It's proof that we can stop the worst-case scenario. If we can scale this to the rest of the polar regions, we might just have a chance. But even as they celebrated the success, they knew the problem was far from solved. The technology had worked, but the clock was ticking. With this new knowledge, Mia and the team knew their mission had just shifted again. They weren't just responding to rising sea levels anymore. They were actively working to reverse the causes of those rising seas. Slowing the melt of the ice sheets was an ambitious step, but it was just the beginning. "We've proven it works," Mia said, as she and the team gathered in the command center. "Now, we need to take it to the next level. We need to deploy our technology on a global scale, and we need to do it fast." Luke added, "The faster we can scale this, the more cities and countries we can protect. But we need more funding, more resources, and more partnerships. This is a race against time." Emily was already looking ahead. "We can do this. Together, we have the technology. We just need to keep pushing forward." Mia looked out at the horizon, where the rising tide was now more than just a threat. It was a challenge they had to overcome, and they would not rest until they had a solution. The world was running out of time. It was no longer a question of if the oceans would rise, but how much and how quickly. Every day that passed brought more flooding, more damage to coastal cities, and more devastation to communities already struggling with the aftermath of climate change. Mia, Luke, and Emily had made a breakthrough in slowing the ice melt in the Arctic, but now the task was to implement their solution everywhere, from the coastlines of Africa to the shores of the Pacific Islands. It wasn't just a scientific challenge, it was a logistical one. They had to act fast, or millions of people would lose their homes. The question was, could they move fast enough to save the world? The team convened in the command center, now filled with engineers, scientists, and climate experts from around the globe. Each one was working tirelessly to turn their breakthrough into something that could be deployed everywhere. The pressure was palpable. Everyone knew what was at stake. "Bangladesh, the Philippines, and Indonesia are at critical risk," Mia said, reviewing the reports. "We can't wait to deploy. The ocean levels are rising faster than we've anticipated, and we need to focus our efforts on the places that will be hit first." Luke pulled up a map on the screen. "Here's what we're facing. Miami and New York are fortified, but places like Jakarta, Lagos, and Mumbai are already dealing with major flooding, and they don't have the infrastructure to protect them. They're getting hit by storms and rising tides that are beyond anything we've seen before. Emily looked at the data, her brow furrowed. We're going to need a much larger operation. I don't just mean more units. I'm talking about more people, more resources, and more coordination than we've ever handled before. Mia nodded. We've been working in silos so far, but now we need a global network. We need governments, corporations, and organizations to work together like never before. But even as the team mapped out their strategies, there was one thing they hadn't accounted for: the speed of the global response. Could governments move fast enough? Could they convince the world's leaders that this was the only option before it was too late? Mia and Luke spent the next week on the phone with world leaders, negotiating emergency funding and international cooperation. What they were asking for wasn't easy. The team needed billions in investment and support from all sectors of society: the military for rapid deployments, local governments for approval and infrastructure support, and corporate partners to build and transport the systems on an unprecedented scale. It's going to take more than just resources, Luke said, looking at the list of contacts. It's going to take political will. We need buy-in from every corner of the world. Without their support, we're just a bunch of scientists with good ideas. Mia sighed. I don't care about politics right now. I care about saving lives. We need to get people on board, fast. Over the next few weeks, the team formed partnerships with several nations, including China, India, and several European countries. The United Nations passed an emergency climate resolution, calling for immediate action and backing the team's plan. The global race was on. The first real test of their global network came when Indonesia, one of the most vulnerable nations in the world to rising sea levels, agreed to implement their system. Jakarta, in particular, had been sinking for years, exacerbated by rising tides, and the city's infrastructure was ill-prepared to handle the crisis. Mia, Luke, and Emily flew to Jakarta to oversee the first large-scale deployment of their system outside of the Arctic. It was a massive undertaking, deploying thousands of modular units, along with desalination plants, cooling units, and flood barriers, all tailored to the specific challenges facing Indonesia. The first thing we need to do is stabilize the shoreline, Luke explained, as they looked out over the city's vulnerable coastal areas. Jakarta is sinking because the ground is compacting under the weight of its own infrastructure. We can't fix that, but we can slow the rise in sea level and protect these communities from storm surges. Emily was already analyzing the data from their satellite systems. We'll need to deploy both the traditional barrier systems and the new cooling technology we've been testing. The goal is to prevent further erosion and provide these communities with fresh water. The logistics were a nightmare. Jakarta's population was over 10 million, and the infrastructure wasn't designed for the scale of the operation the team was now attempting. Trucks, helicopters, and ships were required to transport the equipment to various sites, while local government officials worked to clear and prepare the areas for deployment. We've got to make this work, Mia said, staring at the deployment map. Jakarta is just the start. If we can get this right here, it will be a model for the rest of the world. While the team worked tirelessly on the ground, they faced unexpected challenges. As the systems were being deployed, local protests broke out in Jakarta. Residents, many of whom had lived in the city their whole lives, were growing increasingly frustrated with the government's handling of the crisis. Some were suspicious of the new technology, fearing it would only make things worse. This is going to be harder than we thought, Luke said, as they watched a live broadcast of protests in the city center. We need to win over the people as well as the politicians. Mia looked at the footage, her face determined. We can't afford to fail here. If this doesn't work, we might lose the public's trust. We need to do more than just build the systems. We need to build trust with the people. Emily nodded. We can send out teams to educate and communicate. This is a huge change for them, and it's going to take time for people to understand the technology and its benefits. The team quickly organized town hall meetings and information sessions, explaining the technology in simple terms and showing the people of Jakarta how their lives could improve. Slowly, the protests started to subside, and a growing number of residents began to see the value in the system. The tide of public opinion was turning, but they still had to prove the technology could actually work. Weeks later, After the systems had been fully deployed, the first major test came. A Category 4 storm barreling toward Jakarta. The team's technology was ready, but this was the moment of truth. Could the systems withstand the storm? Would the barriers hold? And the desalination units provide enough fresh water for the city? As the storm approached, Mia, Luke, and Emily stood in the command center, eyes glued to the monitors. The flood barriers were in place, the cooling units were running, and the plant-based systems were already beginning to take root. The storm hit with full force, but the systems did their job. The barriers are holding, Emily said, watching the data in real time. Water levels are rising, but not nearly as quickly as before. The desalination units are keeping up with demand, and the cooling technology is stabilizing the shoreline. Luke punched the air. It's working. It's actually working. Mia exhaled, relieved. This is just the beginning. If we can do this for Jakarta, we can do it anywhere. The success in Jakarta was a turning point. The systems had proven their worth, with the city holding up well against one of the worst storms in recent history. The world was watching, and the team's technology was now viewed as a viable solution for many of the world's most vulnerable cities. Mia, Luke, and Emily knew the road ahead would still be long and full of challenges. But for the first time in a long while, they allowed themselves to feel a glimmer of hope. They weren't just fighting rising sea levels, they were fighting for the future of the world. The world had taken notice. From Jakarta to New York, from Lagos to Sydney, governments were scrambling to adopt the team's climate solutions. The technology to slow the ice melt and prevent flooding was working, but not without consequences. With each victory came new questions. Could they continue to deploy these solutions without unforeseen consequences? For Mia, Luke, and Emily, the path forward was no longer just about technology. It was about responsibility. Could they control the power they had unleashed? And would they be able to manage the ethical and political consequences of a world on the brink of collapse? As the global climate crisis escalated, the real battle wasn't just against rising seas. It was against time, uncertainty, and their own consciences. While the technology was proving effective, the team was beginning to encounter the unforeseen side effects of their solution. Cooling systems, though vital in staving off the melting ice, were consuming massive amounts of energy. Some of the geoengineering systems had side effects on local ecosystems, and the sheer scale of the operation was straining global resources. Mia sat in a meeting room with her team, facing a set of new challenges that had begun to emerge. The deployment in Jakarta had been a success, but other locations were showing troubling signs. The cooling units are effective, but they're consuming too much energy, Luke explained, showing the graphs on the screen. In some places, the power grids are starting to fail because they can't keep up with the demand. And that's only the beginning. In other regions, local wildlife is starting to disappear, possibly because of the cooling technology's impact on local climates. Emily, always the optimist, wasn't ready to give up. We knew this wouldn't be perfect from the start, but we can innovate, right? We're smart enough to adapt the tech to minimize those side effects. We can't stop now. Mia rubbed her temples. I agree, but we can't ignore the damage we're causing either. We're not just saving the planet, we're altering it, and we need to understand what that means. At the rate we're going, we're running the risk of triggering new, unforeseen environmental disasters. The team was divided. They had a proven solution, but with that success came the realization that they might be playing with fire. The ethics of their mission had become more complex. The UN had called for an emergency summit to discuss the rapid deployment of their technology. Leaders from across the globe were concerned, not just about the climate, but also about the unintended consequences of large-scale geoengineering. While the technology had helped slow the rising tides, the environmental side effects were undeniable. Some countries had started to withdraw support, demanding that the team find a more sustainable solution. We need to rethink this, said the UN Secretary-General at the summit. Yes, you've helped prevent catastrophic flooding, but we can't just trade one disaster for another. What happens if we create new ecological imbalances that hurt vulnerable species or disrupt the climate in ways we can't predict? Mia and Luke exchanged looks. The question had always hovered over their work, but now it was real. We have to consider the long-term impacts, Mia said, stepping up to the microphone. The technology we're deploying is powerful, but it needs to be carefully monitored and adjusted. If we just push forward without fully understanding the consequences, we could be setting up a chain reaction that harms the very ecosystems we're trying to save. Emily added, "We're not giving up. We're just acknowledging that we need a more balanced approach. This is a critical moment where we have to be even more careful." The room fell silent. The weight of their words hung heavy. The problem wasn't the technology anymore. It was how they would manage it, both now and in the future. At the same time, political pressures were mounting. While many nations had welcomed the technology, others were starting to push back. The initial success in Indonesia had been a major win, but other countries were beginning to question the fairness and feasibility of relying on such an expensive, complex, and potentially dangerous solution. In the United States, a group of conservative lawmakers had begun to rally against what they saw as global overreach, arguing that the team's technology was too risky and should not be deployed without international oversight. "We need to take a step back," one senator argued during a heated congressional debate. "There's too much power in the hands of a few people. What happens when these systems fail? What happens when they create a new problem? Should we really let these tech geniuses play God?" Mia watched the broadcast from her office, her stomach churning. The political pressure was intensifying, and it wasn't just coming from lawmakers. Corporations, too, were trying to cash in on the new climate tech, pushing the team to speed up deployment at the expense of safety and sustainability. "We need to take control of this narrative," Luke said, pacing the floor. "The science is sound, but we're losing the argument to politics. The world is questioning if we can be trusted with this power." Mia knew Luke was right. It wasn't enough for the technology to work. They had to convince the world that they were capable of managing it responsibly. Just as the team was grappling with these complex issues, they received an unexpected message from Dr. Ava Zhang, a respected environmental scientist who had been skeptical of their methods at the beginning. Ava had spent the past few months researching the ecological side effects of geoengineering, and she had a new perspective that could help them move forward. "I've been looking into alternative methods that could help mitigate some of the impacts your systems are causing," Ava said, speaking via video call. "What if we scale back the cooling technology in certain areas and rely more heavily on reforestation and natural methods to maintain climate stability? We've been focusing too much on artificial solutions without considering the regenerative power of ecosystems." Mia leaned forward. "You're suggesting that we shift some of our efforts to more sustainable, nature-based solutions?" Ava nodded. "Yes. The technology is impressive, but it's not the only solution. What if we combined it with massive reforestation projects and restored wetlands to help absorb carbon and regulate temperatures? There's untapped potential in working with nature, not just against it." Luke was intrigued. "That could balance out the energy consumption of the cooling units and help us reduce the side effects on local ecosystems. Plus, it could win back some of the support we're losing from the environmental community." Emily smiled. "And it could be a way to get the public on board, too. People are still wary of geoengineering, but they trust nature-based solutions more. If we can show that we're working in harmony with the planet instead of manipulating it, we might just win them over." The team was starting to see a clearer path forward. The combination of cutting-edge technology and natural solutions could offer the balanced approach they needed to move forward responsibly. As the summit concluded, Mia, Luke, and Emily presented a new plan, the Harmony Initiative. This initiative aimed to combine their geoengineering systems with nature-based solutions, such as large-scale reforestation and wetland restoration, to create a balanced and sustainable climate mitigation strategy. The Harmony Initiative wasn't just about technology. It was about restoring the planet's natural systems while using human ingenuity to give nature the tools it needed to fight climate change. It was a bold new vision for the future, one that would require global cooperation, scientific innovation, and a deep commitment to sustainability. "We can't just fix what's broken. We have to work with the planet to heal it," Mia said in her speech. "The road ahead is difficult, but if we combine the best of technology with the power of nature, we can build a future where both humanity and the planet can thrive." As they began working with governments and organizations to implement the Harmony Initiative, the team felt a renewed sense of purpose. The road ahead was still full of challenges, but they were no longer just saving the planet from climate change. They were working to restore its balance and ensure its future for generations to come. The Harmony Initiative had been unveiled, and the world's eyes were on the team. It was no longer just about innovative technology. It was about a new global way of thinking. Could humanity move beyond conflict, short-term gains, and self-interest to build a future that benefited everyone? For Mia, Luke, and Emily, the road to success was never going to be easy. They had to convince world leaders, corporations, and ordinary citizens that restoring balance was the only way forward. And they would need to overcome the growing opposition from those who feared the power that technology gave them, or who didn't believe in the cause at all. As the world held its breath, the team knew that the greatest battle lay ahead: unity. Could they unite a fractured world to fight a common enemy, the rising seas and a rapidly changing climate? The first phase of the Harmony Initiative began with pilot projects in areas already devastated by climate change: the Philippines, Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula, and Bangladesh. These countries had suffered some of the worst flooding in recent years and were struggling to recover. The Harmony Initiative's goal was to combine geoengineering systems with large-scale reforestation projects and wetland restoration efforts, creating a dual approach to climate resilience. Mia, Luke, and Emily flew to the Philippines to oversee the first major deployment. As they landed in Manila, the gravity of their task hit them. The Philippines' coastal regions were at the mercy of typhoons, and many communities had already relocated several times due to rising waters. This was where they had to prove that their approach could work on the ground, not just in theory. "We need to start small and scale quickly," Mia said, addressing the local team of engineers and environmentalists. "The reforestation efforts will take time, but the geoengineering systems need to go in first. We'll focus on the most vulnerable areas." Luke checked his phone as a news alert flashed on his screen. "The media is all over this. The world is watching. We have to make sure this works, or we'll lose credibility." Emily nodded, her eyes scanning the horizon. "I've been looking at the satellite data. The coastal erosion here is extreme. We need to get these cooling units in place as soon as possible. The sooner we can stabilize the shoreline, the better." The team quickly got to work. In the coming weeks, they deployed several cooling units along the coastlines, slowing the rise of sea levels. Simultaneously, local communities began planting trees and restoring mangroves, with the goal of reducing the impacts of future storms and increasing carbon capture. Despite the momentum of the Harmony Initiative, not everyone was convinced. Protests erupted in some countries, with people questioning whether the technology was too risky. In the United States, environmental activist groups warned that geoengineering could lead to even greater environmental disasters in the future. "We're playing God," one protester shouted at a rally in New York. "What if this technology backfires? What if it harms local ecosystems even more?" Mia, Luke, and Emily watched the news with growing concern. The protests were gaining traction, and public opinion was becoming increasingly polarized. "It's not just about fixing the problem. We have to win people over," Mia said as they sat in their command center in Manila. "We have to show that we're acting with caution and respect for the environment. If we don't, we'll lose the trust of the public." Luke clenched his fists. "This is bigger than us. If we fail, we're not just letting down our supporters, we're letting down the entire planet." Emily's voice softened. "We knew this was going to be tough, but we have to keep pushing forward, even when the world seems divided. It's the only chance we have." The opposition was louder than ever, but the team continued to focus on their work. They increased their outreach efforts, launching educational campaigns and town hall meetings to explain the technology's benefits and reassure the public that they were taking a measured approach. As the Harmony Initiative gained traction, the team faced mounting political pressure. Some governments had already pledged support, but others remained skeptical. In Europe, a coalition of nations was pushing for stricter environmental regulations, while in Africa, leaders were questioning whether the geoengineering methods were truly the solution they needed. However, the most surprising development came from an unexpected source: China. Initially hesitant about the Harmony Initiative due to its cost and complexity, China had begun to see the potential benefits of combining technology with nature. With rising sea levels threatening the vast coastal cities of Shanghai and Guangzhou, China was eager to experiment with the new approach. Mia, Luke, and Emily traveled to Beijing to meet with Chinese officials. It was a tense moment. For the first time in their careers, They were sitting across the table from some of the most powerful leaders in the world. "We're willing to invest," said the Chinese Minister of Climate Affairs, "but we need a guarantee that this technology will work without destabilizing the ecosystems of our coastal regions. China has suffered enough. We cannot afford another failure." Mia nodded, understanding the gravity of their request. "We can assure you that we are taking every possible precaution. The Harmony Initiative is about balance, not just technology. It's about giving the planet the tools it needs to recover and thrive, not forcing it into submission." After hours of discussion, China agreed to launch pilot projects in 2 of its most vulnerable regions. The partnership was a turning point. If they could prove that the Harmony Initiative worked in China, they would have a powerful ally in the fight against climate change. With China's support in hand, the team turned their attention to broader global coordination. The next phase of the Harmony Initiative required international cooperation on a level never seen before. It was no longer just about a handful of nations working together. It was about mobilizing the entire world. "We need to get everyone on board," Emily said as she reviewed the plans for a global summit. "This is the time for countries to set aside their differences and work together for the greater good. Climate change is a problem that affects us all." Mia agreed. "The Harmony Initiative is our best shot at saving the planet, but it requires every country to take part. No one can afford to sit on the sidelines anymore." The team traveled to Switzerland for the Global Climate Summit, where leaders from nearly every nation gathered to discuss the future of the planet. The stakes were high. The fate of the world seemed to hinge on whether the Harmony Initiative could win broad support. During the summit, Mia took the stage to present their vision for a collaborative, global effort to restore the planet's balance. "The time for action is now," Mia said, her voice steady but filled with passion. "We have the technology. We have the knowledge. We have the power to restore our planet, but we need every nation to join us. This is a crisis that transcends borders, political ideologies, and economic interests. The future of humanity is at stake." The room was silent for a moment as the leaders of the world considered her words. Then, one by one, countries began to pledge their support. The momentum for the Harmony Initiative had shifted. It was no longer just a hopeful vision. It was becoming a global reality. As the summit came to a close, the world was watching. The Harmony Initiative had gained a crucial foothold, and with it, a sense of hope began to spread. "Look at the pledges," Emily said, scrolling through the list of countries that had committed to the initiative. "We have China, India, Brazil, the United States, and Europe. This is huge." Luke smiled for the first time in days. "It's working. We're actually doing this." Mia looked out the window, feeling the weight of the moment. "This is just the beginning. We have a long road ahead of us. But for the first time, it feels like we're all in this together." The team had done what seemed impossible. They had started to unite the world behind a common cause. It wasn't just about saving the planet anymore. It was about showing that cooperation, not division, was the key to overcoming humanity's greatest challenges. But even as the world moved forward, new challenges loomed on the horizon. Challenges that would test not just their technology, but their ability to remain united in the face of crisis. For the first time, it was no longer just about their technology. It was about something much bigger: global trust. The Harmony Initiative was no longer a concept. It was happening. The world had rallied behind the idea of combining cutting-edge technology with nature's regenerative power to fight climate change. But now, the real test had begun. Could they manage this vast, interconnected effort with all its risks, political tensions, and unforeseen consequences? The stakes were higher than ever. The planet was watching, and so were the forces who had always resisted change. Every misstep now felt like it could lead to disaster, not just for the team, but for the world. The first major deployment of the Harmony Initiative took place in the Maldives, one of the world's most vulnerable countries to rising sea levels. The country's government, under pressure from both environmentalists and citizens, had fully committed to the Harmony Initiative's pilot project. The plan was to integrate geoengineering systems along the coastlines, restore coral reefs, and begin reforestation efforts in the country's dwindling forests. The world was watching. Mia, Luke, and Emily flew out to the Maldives to oversee the rollout, accompanied by teams of engineers, scientists, and local workers. As they arrived, they were greeted by the sight of submerged homes and flooded roads, a reminder of the urgency behind their mission. "Everyone here is depending on us," Mia said, gazing out the window of their plane as they flew over the islands. "If this works, it could be a game changer. But if it doesn't," she trailed off, the weight of responsibility pressing down on her. Emily, ever the optimist, offered a reassuring smile. "We've planned this for months. It's not just about the technology, it's about how we collaborate. We'll make it work." As they landed on the island of Malé, the team was greeted by local government officials, including Prime Minister Hassan. He looked hopeful, but there was an underlying tension in his eyes. "We've put all our faith in this initiative," Prime Minister Hassan said, shaking Mia's hand. "The Maldives is at the forefront of climate change. If this doesn't work, we lose everything." Mia nodded, her resolve strengthening. "We'll make sure it works. We're all in this together." The first test came faster than expected. Within days of deploying the cooling units along the coastlines, the team began to notice troubling environmental shifts. Local weather patterns started to change unexpectedly. While the cooling technology was supposed to slow the rise of sea levels, it appeared to be causing erratic storms and unusual temperature fluctuations inland. Luke frowned as he looked at the data. "This isn't good. The technology is doing what it's supposed to, but the atmospheric effects are worse than we predicted." Emily examined the reports. "It's as if the cooling is shifting the climate too dramatically. We may need to adjust the settings." Mia turned to the local climate experts. "We need to figure out how we can stabilize these shifts without causing new problems. This was supposed to be a balancing act. We're tipping the scales." The unexpected storms caused widespread flooding in the central parts of the islands, and in some areas, local agriculture was destroyed. With each new issue, the opposition to the technology grew louder. Environmental groups, who had once supported the Harmony Initiative, now began to question whether this was a case of too much too soon. "We warned you about this," one environmental leader wrote in an open letter to the media. "Geoengineering can't replace natural systems. We're already seeing the unintended consequences." The team scrambled to make adjustments. They calibrated the cooling systems to reduce the temperature shift and adjusted the deployment strategy to take local weather patterns into account. It wasn't easy, and there were setbacks. But slowly, the storm patterns began to stabilize, and the technology started to show signs of improvement. Meanwhile, political pressure was mounting. In Europe, several nations, including Germany and France, were growing skeptical of the Harmony Initiative's scalability. While they had pledged their support, leaders were now questioning whether it was feasible to deploy the technology on a large scale, especially when faced with the kind of environmental disruptions the Maldives had experienced. "We can't keep pushing forward with this without more oversight," said Jean-Pierre Delacroix, the French Minister of Climate Affairs, at an international climate summit in Brussels. The Maldives was a small-scale operation. But what happens when we scale it to Africa, Asia, or even Europe? What if the risks outweigh the benefits? Mia, Luke, and Emily had worked hard to secure global support for the initiative, but now they found themselves on the defensive. "We have to make it work, not just for us, but for the future of the planet," Luke said, his voice tinged with frustration. Mia, always the diplomat, spoke calmly. "We understand your concerns. The Maldives was just the first step. It was a pilot project, and we're already addressing the issues that arose. But this can't be done without trust. The whole world is depending on this." It was clear that they had to regain the confidence of world leaders, but the task was becoming more difficult with each passing day. As if the environmental and political challenges weren't enough, a new threat emerged: disinformation. The opposition to geoengineering had grown louder, but now it was being fueled by organized misinformation campaigns. News outlets, social media platforms, and activist groups began spreading exaggerated and false claims about the Harmony Initiative. "Geoengineering is creating weather disasters," one viral post declared. "It's only a matter of time before the entire ecosystem collapses. Don't let these climate saviors destroy the planet." The team had anticipated some resistance, but the scale of the disinformation was shocking. Reports of failed projects and environmental disasters began to dominate headlines, making it more difficult for the general public to distinguish fact from fiction. Emily was the first to catch wind of the campaign. This is bad. This isn't just protest. This is organized. Someone's trying to sabotage us. Mia clenched her jaw. Who's behind this? We don't know yet, Emily replied, scanning the social media trends. But the misinformation is spreading fast, and it's getting harder to keep the narrative under control. With the credibility of the Harmony Initiative on the line, the team knew they needed to act fast. They began to counter the false reports by providing transparent updates, sharing real-time data on the effects of the technology, and engaging directly with the media. They also worked with climate experts to publicly debunk the myths being spread by opponents. But it wasn't enough. The disinformation campaign gained momentum, and soon protests broke out in major cities across Europe, fueled by the false narratives. As the misinformation spread and the consequences of the Maldives pilot project began to ripple through international media, global response began to fracture. Some countries doubled down on their commitment to the Harmony Initiative, while others started to pull back, demanding further reviews and adjustments. The EU, in particular, announced that it would freeze funding for any future geoengineering projects until a thorough scientific review was conducted. Prime Minister Hassan of the Maldives, once a firm supporter, began to publicly question the project. "We must put the safety of our people first," he said in a press conference. "If the technology causes more harm than good, we cannot proceed." The team found themselves fighting on multiple fronts: environmental disasters, political resistance, and a growing movement of public distrust. They had to find a way to regain control of the narrative and show the world that the Harmony Initiative could be both effective and sustainable. It was Emily who finally found the breakthrough. After weeks of refining the technology and adjusting the cooling systems, they discovered a new way to control the temperature shifts without causing instability in local weather patterns. The key was to introduce a more sophisticated algorithm that adjusted the systems in real time based on ongoing environmental data. "Look at this," Emily said, pointing to her screen. "If we can integrate this algorithm with the cooling units, we can control the atmospheric effects in a way we never could before. It's a real-time dynamic adjustment, like giving the system a brain." Luke looked over her shoulder. "That's genius. This could solve the stability issues." Mia smiled, a sense of relief washing over her. "Let's deploy it. We don't have much time." They immediately began implementing the new technology in the Maldives, adjusting the cooling units and calibrating them with the new algorithm. Within days, they began to see results. The storms subsided, the weather stabilized, and the agricultural damage started to reverse. The news of their success spread quickly, and slowly, the tide began to turn. The Maldives began to show signs of recovery, and other countries started to reconsider their positions. The storms in the Maldives had calmed, the new technology was working, and the narrative around the Harmony Initiative was beginning to shift. The team had fought back against the disinformation, regained public trust, and proved that the initiative could work at scale. But just as hope began to stir, a new threat emerged, one far more dangerous than anything they had faced before. This wasn't about storms or protests. This was something more insidious, something that had been lurking beneath the surface all along. As the world's eyes turned to the progress they were making, a powerful enemy rose, one determined to stop them at any cost. As Mia, Luke, and Emily worked tirelessly to push the Harmony Initiative forward, they began to sense an undercurrent of resistance from a different source: corporations. For years, large multinational companies had been the gatekeepers of the planet's resources, from fossil fuel giants to agribusiness and chemical conglomerates. They had profited from the status quo, and any shift that threatened that system was met with fierce opposition. While some companies had embraced the Harmony Initiative, many saw it as a direct threat to their economic dominance. A month after the success in the Maldives, Mia received an alarming message. It was a report from the UN's Environmental Council, detailing an anonymous petition signed by dozens of influential corporate leaders. The petition called for a moratorium on all geoengineering efforts, citing unforeseen risks to the global economy and the market destabilization that could arise from the large-scale deployment of technology like the Harmony Initiative. "This is bad," Luke said, scanning the report. "These are some of the world's most powerful people. If they pull their support, they won't just pull their support. They'll pull the plug on funding for the entire initiative," Emily said, her voice tinged with frustration. They control the banks, the investors, and the industries that are vital to the infrastructure of this project. Without them, we have nothing. Mia frowned. We need to find out who's behind this. We need to turn this around before it spirals out of control. While the petition was a diplomatic move, it soon became clear that the opposition was far more covert. Corporate interests began to quietly fund anti-harmony groups, pushing more disinformation and organizing grassroots campaigns to stir fear about geoengineering. These groups highlighted supposed failures and potential risks in a calculated attempt to disrupt the momentum. They're using the same tactics as before, but now they're doing it with money, power, and influence, Emily observed, studying the reports of new protests and media campaigns. Mia paced back and forth, deep in thought. We're dealing with a silent war. They're trying to strangle the project without firing a single shot. Luke slammed his fist on the table. How can they get away with this? They're acting like the planet's future is just a business transaction to them. They're not acting alone, Mia said quietly, staring out of the window. There are governments involved, too. Some of the world's most powerful nations are backing these corporations because their interests align. We're not just fighting CEOs, we're fighting a global system. As the corporate opposition mounted, the public support for the Harmony Initiative began to waver. People were confused. They had heard the success stories, seen the first signs of recovery, but now the narrative was shifting again. News outlets, fueled by corporate-backed media campaigns, began running stories that cast doubt on the initiative's long-term viability. But then, something unexpected happened. A grassroots movement began to rise. Ordinary citizens, inspired by the successes they saw in the Maldives and other early adopters, began to take matters into their own hands. They started organizing rallies, hosting educational forums, and sharing their own experiences with the Harmony Initiative's impact. In places like Brazil and Kenya, where deforestation had been a massive issue, the public saw real progress as tree planting initiatives took root. In India, communities impacted by extreme heat waves began to notice a difference as the geoengineering systems brought temperature stability. The people are rising up, Emily said, smiling as she scrolled through social media posts from around the world. They're not just passive supporters anymore. They're becoming part of the movement. Mia nodded. This is the real power of the Harmony Initiative. It's not just about tech. It's about people taking control of their future. But even with public support swelling in their favor, the corporate opposition wasn't backing down. The moment of reckoning arrived when the World Economic Forum, WEF, called an emergency summit to address the growing concern over geoengineering. The WEF, a gathering of the world's wealthiest and most influential leaders, was a crucial battleground. This was the final opportunity for the corporate and political elite to take a stand and rally against the Harmony Initiative. At the summit, the team was invited to present the case for the Harmony Initiative one last time. It was a pivotal moment. Mia, Luke, and Emily prepared their most compelling arguments yet, hoping to convince the assembled leaders that this was not just the right choice, but the only choice. However, as they arrived at the summit in Davos, they found themselves facing an unprecedented level of resistance. The corporate coalition was united, their arguments more polished and aggressive than ever before. A powerful CEO, Elon Musk, the head of a global oil conglomerate, took the stage with a carefully crafted speech. Ladies and gentlemen, we cannot ignore the economic realities of geoengineering, Elena began. The Harmony Initiative, despite its promises, threatens to disrupt global supply chains, destroy millions of jobs, and risk everything we have worked for. We cannot afford to gamble with the future of the economy. The room erupted in applause. Luke's face tightened with anger. They're framing this as a choice between technology or the economy. Mia leaned in, her voice barely above a whisper. This isn't just a debate. This is their last chance to stop us. The presentation that followed was an intense back and forth. Mia, Luke, and Emily made their case passionately, explaining how the Harmony Initiative was designed to benefit everyone, from the poorest communities facing rising seas to the richest corporations who would ultimately profit from a stable planet. But every argument was countered by powerful CEOs and governments aligned with the corporate interests. They promised economic stability and warned of the catastrophic risks that geoengineering posed. Finally, it came down to a vote. The fate of the Harmony Initiative would be decided by the heads of state and corporate leaders in that room. The team sat on edge, waiting for the final decision. The vote was counted, and the results were announced. It was too close to call. Mia felt her heart race as she realized that the Harmony Initiative was teetering on the brink of disaster. They hadn't won, but they hadn't lost either. And then, a surprise. A coalition of smaller nations, countries like Costa Rica, New Zealand, and Morocco, had pledged their support to the Harmony Initiative. They had voted overwhelmingly in favor of continuing the project, despite the corporate opposition. The balance of power had shifted. These countries are the ones who will bear the most impact from climate change, Emily said, smiling. They see what's at stake. Mia let out a breath she didn't realize she had been holding. This isn't over, but we've just won a significant victory. The world had taken a breath. The Harmony Initiative had survived its first, brutal test. The corporate opposition, the political battles, the misinformation. But the real work was just beginning. With the victory at the World Economic Forum, Mia, Luke, and Emily knew they had an opportunity to change the world. But as they expanded the project's reach, new obstacles arose, some even more dangerous than the ones they had already faced. And lurking in the shadows was the real question. Would they be able to scale their dream before it became their downfall? It was a moment of triumph, but also of uncertainty. After the WEF summit, the Harmony Initiative gained a surge of support from emerging economies, smaller nations, and progressive corporations. But the scale-up would require more than just political backing. The team now faced the Herculean task of managing operations on a global scale. This meant everything from coordinating international teams to navigating local political nuances to tackling logistical challenges of unprecedented scale. Emily, ever the strategist, had a plan. We need to set up regional hubs, she said as she outlined the roadmap to Mia and Luke. Each region will have its own self-sustaining operations that we'll oversee remotely. The tech is ready. It's the infrastructure and global partnerships we need to refine. Mia nodded. What about the supply chain? We need to ensure that everything from solar panels to water filtration systems is manufactured, shipped, and deployed efficiently. Luke leaned forward. We'll partner with local manufacturers where possible. If we can integrate regional manufacturing, it will lower costs and create local jobs, vital for support. The plan was ambitious, but it was the only way forward. The first regional hub was set to launch in Southeast Asia, a region hit hard by deforestation and rising temperatures. It was a perfect testing ground for scaling the Harmony Initiative's environmental restoration and climate stabilization technologies. As the team launched their efforts in Southeast Asia, they began to experience unexpected setbacks. Equipment delays, local bureaucracy, and logistical issues were common, but there was something more insidious at play. Mia received a cryptic email late one night, an anonymous tip-off about an internal leak. There's someone sabotaging our supply chains, the email read. Mysterious delays and missing shipments aren't accidents. Watch who you trust. It didn't take long for the team to confirm their worst fears. Sabotage. Someone within their own ranks was either leaking critical information or actively working to derail the project. Who would do this? Emily demanded, pacing back and forth. Who's betraying us? Mia's eyes narrowed. I don't know, but we have to find out fast. We can't afford to lose momentum now. Luke had a different concern. What if it's not just an internal issue? What if someone is paying insiders to disrupt us? It was clear the team was dealing with an organized threat, one that could destroy everything they had worked for. The sabotage was subtle, designed to delay shipments, compromise technology, and sow distrust within the team. The team quickly realized that the sabotage wasn't random. They discovered a direct link to a handful of companies, rivals in the energy and technology sectors who were actively trying to undermine the Harmony Initiative. These companies had begun to infiltrate their operation by recruiting disgruntled employees or planting spies within their ranks. As they traced the sabotage back to these companies, they realized the extent of the opposition's efforts. Corporate spies had gained access to confidential project designs, employee communications, and logistical strategies. The team was being outmaneuvered on multiple fronts. Emily clenched her fists. This isn't just sabotage. It's espionage. And it's systematic. They want to take us down before we reach critical mass. Mia stared at the report. If they can cripple our operations now, we'll never be able to scale fast enough to change the course of the planet. We need to expose them, and do it quickly. But the sabotage wasn't the only problem. In Southeast Asia, political unrest was brewing. Local governments were growing suspicious of the project's rapid expansion, worried about the influence of foreign entities and the potential for outsiders to gain too much control over their resources. Some of the regional leaders, who had once championed the initiative, were now questioning its long-term impact. The Harmony Initiative might work, but we can't let foreign interests control our future, said Prime Minister Tan, a key supporter in Southeast Asia. We want to see the benefits here, but we also want to ensure that local communities are prioritized. Luke was taken aback. But that's what we've been doing. We're building local partnerships, training local workers, and creating jobs. Tan shook his head. I understand that, but people here don't trust that outside powers have our best interests at heart. We've seen how corporations manipulate their way into power. We need to take more control over how this initiative is implemented. The team knew that their success was now at risk not only from corporate sabotage, but also from nationalist sentiment and a growing distrust of foreign-led projects. Meanwhile, the environmental challenges they had expected were becoming more complicated. As the Harmony Initiative expanded its global reach, the team found that the effects of climate change were more complex than even their advanced systems could predict. In South America, their reforestation projects were struggling against a growing season of unprecedented drought. In parts of Africa, rising heat waves were causing crops to wither even as the cooling systems tried to stabilize local temperatures. No matter how advanced their technology was, nature wasn't going to play by their rules. We've underestimated the complexity of these ecosystems, Mia said, staring at the troubling data. We can't control everything, not even with the best tech. We never said we had all the answers, Emily reminded her, but we've got to keep adjusting. We need to rethink how we approach these localized issues. Maybe we need to scale back in some areas and focus on others. The team's resolve was tested as they wrestled with how to maintain their vision without causing harm. Every new climate intervention was a delicate balance between technology and nature, progress and preservation. As the team worked tirelessly to overcome both sabotage and political opposition, they discovered something even more shocking. The corporate players behind the sabotage weren't just trying to slow them down. They were planning to take control of the Harmony Initiative's core technology. Mia uncovered evidence that a few influential CEOs had been working in the shadows to reverse engineer the technology and eventually market it for themselves. They were attempting to monopolize the very systems that the team had developed to save the planet. Luke felt a surge of anger. They're not just trying to stop us. They want to own this project, to profit off our dream. We can't let that happen, Emily said, her voice hardening with determination. We've come too far to let them steal everything we've worked for. Mia knew that this was the battle for the future, a battle that would define whether their dream of a new world could survive. The team would have to fight not only for their project's survival, but also for its integrity. The Harmony Initiative was no longer just an idea or a dream. It was a movement that had touched the hearts and minds of millions around the world. But now, as the team struggled to hold on to what they had built, they realized they were facing a new enemy, corporate greed. This enemy wasn't content with simply slowing them down. It wanted to take control of the very technology that could save the planet and use it for profit. If they didn't act quickly, everything they had worked for could be lost. After uncovering the shocking truth about corporate interests working to hijack the Harmony Initiative's technology, Mia, Luke, and Emily knew they had to move fast. They'd already been fighting a battle against misinformation, sabotage, and political resistance. But now they had a far more dangerous adversary, powerful, entrenched forces with the means to destroy them from within. The enemy was well-funded, and their influence spread across global markets. These companies weren't just big players in energy or technology. They were also tied to political leaders, financial institutions, and military powers. Elena Voss, the CEO of the oil conglomerate who had been the face of the corporate opposition at the WEF summit, was now playing a different game, one of control and subversion. Their goal is simple, Luke said, his face grim. They want to take the Harmony Initiative and turn it into their next cash cow. They're after the patents, the algorithms, the technology, everything. Emily shook her head in disbelief. This isn't just about power anymore. It's about stealing the future from the world. They know that if this works, we'll fundamentally change the global economy. They're not going to let that happen. Mia sat back, running her fingers through her hair. We have to fight back, but we can't do it alone. We need to expose them, gather support from our allies, and rally the public. If we fail now, we'll lose everything. The team knew they had to act quickly before the corporate forces could solidify their control. But exposing Elena Voss and the other corporate masterminds behind the plot would require solid evidence, a coordinated effort, and a strategy that wouldn't just be a last-ditch effort but a blow to the heart of the conspiracy. Mia reached out to a trusted journalist, someone who had supported the Harmony Initiative from the start. Aidan Porter, an investigative reporter who had risked his career to cover environmental issues. He had long suspected that something sinister was at play behind the scenes. But now, Mia had the proof he needed. Let's make them feel the heat, Mia told Aidan over the phone. We've got the documents, the emails, and the names of the people involved. We're going public with this. Aidan didn't hesitate. You've got it. I'll get my team on it. We'll run the story at prime time, hit them where it hurts the most. By the next morning, Aidan's exposé was live. A comprehensive investigation into the corporations trying to hijack the Harmony Initiative's core technology, complete with evidence, interviews, and detailed information about the shadowy network that spanned governments, corporations, and banks. The story hit like an earthquake, shaking the foundations of corporate power and drawing immediate attention from the global press. But the corporations weren't going to take this lying down. The fallout was swift. Elena Voss and her associates began a counteroffensive, trying to discredit the report and downplay the revelations. They used their media influence to spin the story, claiming that the Harmony Initiative was a dangerous experiment and that the allegations were a smear campaign designed to destabilize the economy. It didn't take long for the media machine to go into overdrive. News outlets funded by corporate interests began publishing rebuttals, calling Mia, Luke, and Emily idealistic dreamers who were endangering the global economy for the sake of a techno-utopia. The backlash was fierce. Emily slammed her fist on the table. They're turning this into a battle of perceptions. It's us versus them, and they've got billions in resources. Mia, ever calm under pressure, tried to focus. We have to double down on the truth. The world needs to know what they're really trying to do. With the global media war raging, the team also had to contend with the political fallout. The governments that had previously supported the Harmony Initiative were now caught in the crossfire. Some feared the corporate retaliation and wavered in their commitment, while others used the situation as an opportunity to position themselves as champions of national sovereignty. In Europe, some leaders began questioning whether the global reach of the Harmony Initiative was threatening their country's autonomy. In the United States, conservative lawmakers seized the opportunity to rally their base, framing the initiative as a globalist conspiracy meant to undermine national interests. It became clear that the project's future would hinge not just on corporate influence, but on political allegiances. This is a game of survival, Mia, Luke said, his voice tight. We need to keep the political momentum on our side or risk losing everything. Mia agreed. We've built a network of allies who believe in the vision. Now, we have to strengthen those alliances and keep pushing for the global good. The stakes are too high to let them win. It was time for the final showdown. The team had made a bold decision to take the battle directly to the UN, the one institution that had the global authority to regulate corporate activities and enforce international law. The UN had long supported the Harmony Initiative, but now, the question was whether it could withstand the pressure from corporate and political forces trying to derail the project. The UN General Assembly called a special session to address the escalating crisis. Mia, Luke, and Emily traveled to New York, where they would present the case for the Harmony Initiative one last time, not just as a technological breakthrough, but as a global imperative. As they stood before the assembly, the weight of the moment settled over them. The world's leaders were watching. This was it, their chance to secure the future of the planet. Mia stepped forward, her voice steady but urgent. We're not here to talk about technology. We're here to talk about the future of humanity. For decades, corporations and governments have fought for control over the planet's resources, ignoring the very people they're meant to serve. The Harmony Initiative is different. It's for the people. Luke and Emily stood beside her, their faces resolute. This isn't about profit. It's about survival. It's about restoring balance to the Earth, for everyone. But Elena Voss, sitting in the front row with her allies, wasn't backing down. You cannot control the future of the planet with technology, she declared, her voice booming. You cannot force nature into submission. The Harmony Initiative is flawed and dangerous, and we will not allow it to destroy the global economy. The debate raged on, but the eyes of the world were fixed on that room. The battle was now a battle of wills, and the future of the planet hung in the balance. The UN General Assembly was the final battleground. The world's leaders, global media, and corporate giants watched as Mia, Luke, and Emily fought to protect the future of the Harmony Initiative. The stakes were astronomical, not just for the project, but for the very survival of the Earth's ecosystems. As the final vote was cast, a new chapter began. But with victory came unforeseen consequences, and the road ahead was far from certain. The air in the General Assembly was thick with tension as Mia, Luke, and Emily made their case for the Harmony Initiative. For hours, speeches had been made, arguments had been fought, and the room had swelled with conflicting opinions. Elena Voss, with her polished rhetoric, had painted the initiative as a globalist plot that would destabilize the global economy and erode national sovereignty. But Mia's words, urgent, emotional, and backed by irrefutable evidence, had struck a chord with many. Mia concluded her speech with a powerful statement. We cannot afford to wait any longer. Our world is changing at a pace we can no longer control. If we do not act, we will watch as the Earth suffers and our future is stolen from us. The Harmony Initiative is not a threat to sovereignty. It is a gift to humanity. This is our moment. The room was silent for a moment, then erupted into heated debate. Some countries, particularly those in the global south, strongly supported the initiative, seeing it as a chance for equitable development. But other countries, powerful, industrialized nations, were not convinced. They feared losing control over energy resources and economic power. The vote was a tipping point. For the first time, the world was forced to choose between continuing down the path of exploitation and inaction or embracing the risk of something radically new. The result would either seal the fate of the Harmony Initiative or crush it once and for all. The moment came when the votes were finally counted. A narrow win. The Harmony Initiative had secured the UN's backing, but just barely. Mia stood frozen as the final tally was announced. The room erupted into applause, but her mind raced. They had won, but at what cost? The future was still uncertain, and the fight was far from over. Even though the UN had officially backed the Harmony Initiative, the aftermath was nothing like the team had envisioned. The media frenzy intensified, and the corporate forces didn't back down. If anything, they grew even more desperate and aggressive. Elena Voss was quick to launch a counteroffensive. This is not a victory for the people, it's a greenwashing farce. This initiative will destroy jobs, destroy industries, and wreck the global economy. We will not let a group of idealists undermine everything we've built. The media, still heavily influenced by corporate interests, ran with this narrative. Fear-mongering articles flooded the press, painting the Harmony Initiative as an untested, dangerous experiment. The narrative shifted from progress to panic, with global markets reacting violently. The backlash was not just from the corporate world. There was political fallout as well. Many countries, especially those heavily invested in the oil and gas industries, began pulling back their support. They feared economic ruin if they were forced to adopt the Harmony Initiative's disruptive technologies too quickly. Mia, Luke, and Emily were now seen as dangerous radicals by many who had once been their allies. Their fight for the future had sparked a global crisis of confidence. The team now found themselves standing at a crossroads. The battle was far from won, and they had made powerful enemies in the corporate world. The victory at the UN had given them legitimacy, but the path forward would require new alliances and creative strategies. The global powers were still divided, and the forces of opposition were determined to win by any means necessary. Luke, the ever-optimistic engineer, refused to give up. This isn't over. We've come too far to let a few corporations stall us. We need to show the world that we can deliver on our promises. and that means putting people over profits. Emily, who had always been the diplomat of the team, was more cautious. We need to think strategically. The next phase isn't just about technology. It's about gaining trust. If we can't unite the people behind us, we'll never succeed. The team needed to strengthen their grassroots support, rallying those who believed in the initiative's potential for good. They began reaching out to local communities, environmental groups, and even corporate insiders who were sympathetic to their cause. Slowly, they started building a network of influential allies who could counteract the corporate-backed opposition. But just as they began to gain ground, a new threat emerged: a cyber attack. The Harmony Initiative servers were hacked, and sensitive data was stolen. The attackers wiped out critical infrastructure, setting back the project's global rollout by months. Mia received an encrypted message on her phone. This is just the beginning. It was clear that the forces opposing them were not just playing political games. They were waging a war to control the future. Despite the cyber attack, the team pressed forward, but the toll was taking its toll on their personal lives. Mia, who had been driven by a sense of urgency from the start, found herself growing physically exhausted. Sleepless nights, endless meetings, and constant pressure had worn her down. Emily, too, struggled to maintain the balance between personal relationships and her role as a leader. The weight of responsibility was beginning to take its toll on her health. Luke, ever the optimist, seemed unscathed, but even he was starting to feel the strain. "We can't keep pushing like this forever," he said during one late-night strategy session. "We need more than just willpower. We need resources and time." But the world was moving faster than they were prepared for. As they struggled to recover from the cyber attack and continue with their rollout, the political pressure mounted. At the same time, environmental disasters continued to escalate. Floods, wildfires, and droughts were ravaging communities that were already vulnerable. The demand for action had never been greater. Mia knew, deep down, that the initiative couldn't just be a tech solution anymore. It had to be a global movement, a change in the very fabric of society. The Harmony Initiative wasn't just about restoring the environment. It was about reshaping the way humanity lived. It wasn't all bad news, though. As the media continued to spin the narrative, something remarkable happened. The grassroots movement that had quietly supported the Harmony Initiative began to rise up. Ordinary people, communities, and organizations rallied behind the project. Youth movements, environmentalists, and everyday citizens took to the streets, demanding that the world finally prioritize the future. "We've had enough of corporate greed," one activist shouted in a rally in London. "It's time for real change." For the first time, Mia felt a surge of hope. We're not alone. We have the people on our side. And together, we can build a new world. But there was still so much left to do. The forces against them were powerful, and the road ahead would be filled with new challenges. The team knew that the fight for the future of the Earth would take everything they had, and more. The Harmony Initiative's future was on the line. After months of political wrangling, corporate sabotage, and cyber attacks, Mia, Luke, and Emily were standing at the edge of a precipice. The corporate forces had rallied their allies, and the stakes had never been higher. But this time, they weren't going to fight alone. With the power of the people behind them, the team was ready to face their adversaries head-on. It was a battle not just for the future of technology, but for the future of the world itself. The world had finally reached a breaking point. After the UN vote, the tension had only grown. Governments were teetering on the edge, caught between the powerful corporations threatening economic collapse and the growing pressure from the people demanding action on climate change. The Harmony Initiative was at the center of the conflict, and there was no way to escape its shadow. The team had called for a global climate summit, the final showdown where they would stake everything on one last attempt to secure the future of the initiative. The event was to take place in Geneva, with global leaders, activists, corporate representatives, and millions of people tuning in to watch the proceedings. It would be the most important day of their lives. "We have to make them see," Mia said as she paced in their temporary headquarters, her eyes fixed on the large digital map of the world that hung on the wall. "This isn't just about technology. It's about survival. We cannot afford to lose." Luke, who had been working tirelessly on the tech infrastructure, gave her a determined nod. They might control the media, they might have all the money, but they don't have what we have, the people, and the truth. Emily, who had been fielding messages from supporters around the world, stepped forward. It's bigger than any one of us. It's the future. We have to show them that the world will not accept business as usual. We've come this far. We can't stop now. The pressure was immense. The corporate-backed opposition wasn't going to let up, and they had amassed their own team of powerful negotiators and political figures. Elena Vos, now a key figure in the global economy, had turned the debate into a high-stakes chess game, leveraging her influence to sway governments and corporations to her side. She was prepared to do anything to undermine the Harmony Initiative, including using underhanded tactics to ensure the summit's failure. But Mia, Luke, and Emily had one thing she didn't: the power of global public support. Their message had resonated with millions of people across the world. They had sparked a movement, and now they were ready to make sure that movement couldn't be silenced. The day of the summit arrived, and the world watched in anticipation. The venue was packed with dignitaries, diplomats, and corporate moguls. Media outlets from across the globe broadcasted the proceedings live, making it one of the most viewed events in history. The fate of the Harmony Initiative would be decided here, and the team knew that this moment would change everything. The summit was divided into two main sessions: the global panel discussion and the public referendum. The first session was where leaders and experts would present their cases, followed by debates and speeches. The second session would involve voting, not just by politicians, but by the people, through a digital referendum that would allow anyone with internet access to cast their vote on the future of the initiative. The opening speeches were electrifying. Mia, Luke, and Emily stood united on stage, representing the collective will of the people. Mia was the first to speak, her voice carrying the weight of everything they had fought for. We are at a crossroads. For too long, we have allowed a handful of corporations to dictate our future, to exploit our planet for their own profit. But the world is changing. We are changing. We are no longer passive bystanders in the destruction of our world. We are activists, innovators, and citizens who believe that we can create something better, something more just, more sustainable. Her words struck a chord with the audience, but Elena Vos was ready with her counterattack. We are not here to destroy the future, Elena said, rising to the stage. What we are seeing today is the ultimate naivety. The Harmony Initiative, while it may sound promising, is a fantasy. It will not save the planet. It will destroy economies, eliminate jobs, and force people into a future they never signed up for. We must take a stand for economic stability, for job security, and for national sovereignty. The room buzzed with tension. The two sides had drawn clear battle lines, and the debate was becoming increasingly bitter. Each side had its supporters, but who would win the day? As the debate raged on, something remarkable happened. The people spoke. Across the world, people took to their phones, laptops, and tablets to cast their votes in the digital referendum. Within hours, the numbers were flooding in, and it became clear that the Harmony Initiative was gaining widespread support. Social media was ablaze with hashtags like #OurFutureNow and #SaveTheEarth, and cities across the globe were erupting in rallies. For the first time, ordinary people were not just spectators, they were the drivers of change. Mia and her team watched the results unfold in real time, their hearts pounding. The votes were coming in fast, and it was becoming clear that the people's support was overwhelming. The corporations and governments couldn't ignore the tide of public opinion. The world was demanding change. "This is it," Luke whispered. "The world's with us." But just as victory seemed imminent, Elena Vos made one last desperate move. In a last-ditch attempt to stop the initiative, she launched a massive corporate-backed smear campaign, flooding the media with fake reports about the initiative's supposed failures and potential security threats. It was a calculated strike designed to sway the final few undecided voters and disrupt the public's confidence. As the votes continued to roll in, the momentum seemed to shift. The team knew they had to act fast. It was time to reclaim the narrative. Mia took to the stage once more, addressing the world directly. The truth is unshakable. The Harmony Initiative has always been about one thing: protecting the planet. It has always been about ensuring a future for our children and grandchildren. We are not here to control the world. We are here to heal it. In that moment, something extraordinary happened. The people, the youth, the activists, the scientists, the innovators, all began to unite in a way they never had before. In cities across the world, spontaneous rallies and protests erupted, all calling for the same thing: a world where greed would no longer come before the planet. The power of the people was undeniable. The final vote came down to the wire, but as the numbers were tallied, it was clear. The Harmony Initiative had won. The people had spoken. With the victory, Mia, Luke, and Emily knew that their journey was far from over. The world was in a state of upheaval, and the real work of implementing the Harmony Initiative would require years of effort, sacrifice, and collaboration. But as they stood together, looking out over the vast crowd of supporters, they knew one thing. They had changed the world forever. The road ahead would be challenging, but they were no longer fighting alone. The future was now in their hands. And for the first time, the future felt possible. The war was over, but the work had only just begun. The Harmony Initiative had been passed, the people had spoken, and the corporate powers were forced to yield. But now, Mia, Luke, and Emily stood at the precipice of a new chapter. A chapter that would require every ounce of their energy, creativity, and heart. The planet was teetering on the edge, but for the first time in decades, there was hope. And with hope, there was the possibility of a better future. The sun rose over a transformed world. The initial wave of change had been turbulent, filled with uncertainty, and for many, fear. The old world, one driven by unrelenting consumption, profit above all, and the exploitation of resources, was giving way to something new. The Harmony Initiative had secured the first phase of its global rollout. But now the real work began, building a sustainable global network of green technologies, renewable energy sources, and eco-friendly infrastructure. The vision of a world where communities thrived in harmony with nature was beginning to take shape, but there was still a long way to go. Mia stood before the giant digital map once again, this time not in a war room, but in the heart of a global sustainability center that symbolized the future. It had been a year since the victory, and the Harmony Initiative's core technologies were now active in over 100 countries. Energy grids were being restructured. Cities were embracing green urban planning, and people were learning how to live within the planet's limits. "This is just the beginning," Mia said quietly to herself. "We've got this." Luke, who had been overseeing the tech side of the initiative, walked into the room. His face was tired but determined, his eyes alight with the fire of new possibilities. "We did it," he said, his voice a mix of awe and disbelief. "It's actually happening. The first batch of energy cells just went live in South America, and we've got solar infrastructure planned for Africa. This is it. This is the future." Emily joined them, looking out at the city skyline, where wind turbines and solar panels adorned the rooftops of once gray buildings. The air was cleaner, and the streets were quieter, filled with the hum of electric vehicles and the bustle of community gardens. "We've come so far, but there's still so much to do," Emily added. "We've brought the people on board, but now we need to make sure that governments and corporations stay committed to this new way of thinking." The initiative was no longer just a technology project. It had become a movement, a global cultural shift. In cities across the world, people were no longer asking, "What can I buy?" but "How can I contribute to the planet's well-being?" The corporate giants had no choice but to adapt, or risk being left behind in an increasingly eco-conscious world. But not everyone was ready to embrace this new world. While many countries were on board, others remained hesitant, holding on to the old ways of consumption and power. Some lobbyists and politicians still fought tooth and nail to protect the fossil fuel industry. Elena Voss, despite her defeat, continued to leverage her influence to slow down the progress wherever she could. "We have to stay vigilant," Emily warned, sensing the persistent threat. "There are forces out there who won't stop until they've undone everything we've built. They'll try to make this about profits and control again." Despite the victories, the team was not untouched by the cost of their work. The emotional toll of years of conflict, constant pressure, and personal sacrifice had left its mark. Mia, in particular, struggled to find a sense of peace. She was often up late at night, poring over reports, strategizing the next phase of the initiative, and checking in on the progress in each region. She had come so far, but the weight of leadership was growing heavier each day. Luke, though always hopeful and energetic, had begun to wonder if the global momentum would truly last. He spent long hours in his lab, working on new prototypes, but he couldn't shake the feeling that they were fighting against time. The world needed results, fast. And then there was Emily. She had taken on the role of global ambassador, working tirelessly to bridge the gap between grassroots supporters and government officials. She spent countless hours on video calls, at summits, and in meetings with local leaders. The strain was wearing on her, especially as she watched the world's disparities continue to widen. Some nations had embraced the new technologies with open arms, while others, still mired in poverty, struggled to even begin the transition. "I thought it would be easier," she admitted one evening as she sat across from Mia in their shared workspace. "I thought that once the initiative was passed, everything would fall into place. But it's not that simple. People are scared. They're afraid of change, of losing everything they know." Mia looked at her, her gaze soft but resolute. "I know. I've seen it too. The old world isn't going to let go without a fight. But we're not just giving people technology. We're giving them hope. And hope can change everything." Despite the challenges, the team pushed forward, focusing on education, collaboration, and innovation as the core pillars of the next phase. They partnered with global universities to launch educational programs, training the next generation of leaders in sustainability and climate science. Schools began incorporating environmental studies and tech education into their curriculums. It was clear that if this change was going to last, it had to be built into the cultural fabric of the world. There was a renewed focus on local solutions. Communities, once left to fend for themselves, were now actively participating in the decision-making process. Local farming cooperatives, eco-tech startups, and community organizations began to form, creating a network of innovation that was powerful enough to rival even the largest corporations. But despite the progress, the reality of global inequality couldn't be ignored. The team focused their efforts on empowering developing countries, ensuring that they had access to the resources and knowledge needed to implement sustainable solutions. Mia and Emily took frequent trips to South America and Africa, meeting with local leaders to ensure that the benefits of the Harmony Initiative would reach every corner of the planet, not just the wealthy elite. One night, as they sat in a small village in Kenya, watching the sunset over the savannah, Mia had an epiphany. "The work we're doing here," she said softly, "isn't just about saving the planet. It's about giving everyone a chance to create a future, a chance to thrive." Luke had been silent for a while, deep in thought. He looked up, smiling. "And we're giving them the tools to do it." As the years passed, the world began to change in ways that once seemed impossible. Fossil fuel industries that had once been untouchable were now in decline, and renewable energy had become the standard. The Harmony Initiative had sparked a global economic transformation, one that prioritized people over profits, sustainability over consumption, and cooperation over competition. But Mia, Luke, and Emily knew that the journey was not over. Climate change still posed a grave threat. Social and economic inequalities were still prevalent, and there would always be those who would resist progress. But the hope they had ignited could not be extinguished, and the movement they had started would continue to grow and evolve. "Look at what we've done," Luke said, gazing out over the city where wind farms and solar panels now dotted the skyline. "This is the world we always dreamed of, and it's only the beginning." Mia smiled, her heart swelling with pride. "We built this together, and together, we'll keep building." Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?